Okay, good evening, everyone. Good evening and welcome to Council Chambers here at City Hall for tonight's public hearing. It's September the 19th, 2017. We have a very full agenda tonight. We'll call this public meeting to order. And Madam Clerk, can we have the roll call, please?
Mayor Robertson's in the chair. Councillor Louie. Councillor Stevenson. Councillor Deal. Councillor Jang. Councillor Reimer. Councillor Ball has a leave of absence for medical leave. Councillor Carr. Councillor Affleck. And Councillor DeGenova. Mr. Mayor, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And first we'll acknowledge we are on the unceded homelands of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And before we go into our next steps with the agenda, we have to go through our typical new procedure committee of the whole again, and that is in order to avoid procedural uncertainties which arose at a previous public hearing due to a loss of quorum while we were in committee of the whole. The City Clerk advised us that while Council is required under Section 18.13 of the Procedure Bylaw to move a motion to go into committee of the whole at public hearing, it is not required to sit as committee of the whole during the hearing. Therefore, it is her advice that the motion to go into committee of the whole be put to a vote and failed by Council. Here we go again. Moved by Councillor Deal and seconded by Councillor Louie to go into committee of the whole. All those in favor of that motion and all those opposed? And unanimously opposed, so we will not sit in committee of the whole. We will sit as council, which means all motions require a seconder. That's the procedural step that we've been starting these public hearings with. And that means we're ready to dive into our agenda in a moment here. Maybe I'll just go over the general announcements with respect to speakers. Those of you who are here tonight to speak to one of the items on the agenda tonight, I'll just go through the basics on that. Speakers have 5 minutes to make their comments to Council and should limit their comments to the merits of the report that is being considered by Council. We ask that you state as speaker whether you support or are opposed to the recommendations. And speakers may speak once for up to 5 minutes. You don't have to use all your 5 minutes, and I will give you a heads up as you approach the time. There is a clock on the podium there as well, keeping track. If you have additional comments, you can submit them in writing to the clerks on paper or to the email publichearing@vancouver.ca. And if you are speaking on behalf of 3 or more persons or 3 or more organizations, you have an additional 3 minutes to speak, 8 minutes in total. The persons or representative of the organizations must also be present and must not be speakers themselves. You may have questions from Council following your comments. I will let you know on that front. And finally, if Council does not conclude hearing from all the speakers tonight, we will recess and reconvene this meeting on Thursday, September 21st. So Thursday evening at 6 o'clock here in Council Chamber if we don't get through hearing all the speakers tonight. And that really will depend on how many people are here to speak, because there are people registered to speak, obviously, and then anyone who is here who isn't registered yet is certainly has the opportunity to speak as well. So we have 9 items on the agenda tonight, and a good dozens of speakers. But certainly we have made it through and heard from this many speakers before on previous public hearing agendas. So it's conceivable we hear from everybody tonight. I would just say that Council does have the option to extend tonight's meeting to hear speakers. We typically make that decision a few hours into the public hearing once we see how the flow is going and get a sense for whether we can extend and hear from everyone without going too late. So with that, we will dive into the 9-item agenda with the first. That's the text amendment for 2017 inflationary rate adjustments to density bonus contributions. This is one of a number of the items that do not have any registered speakers, so they generally will go by quickly if there are no speakers to them. So, Madam Clerk, can you read the application summary of correspondence received on item number 1? Please.
This is an application by the General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability to amend the Zoning and Development Bylaw to implement inflationary adjustments to the density bonus contributions by increasing the values of the affordable housing shares and the amenity shares in the RM8 and RM8N district schedule and in the RM9, RM9A, RM9N, RM9AN, and RM9BN district schedule. The General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability recommends approval. Council has received no correspondence on this application since it was scheduled for public hearing.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And we have Chris Clibben is here from planner from Citywide Regional Planning Division to review the application. Given there are no speakers, we can waive the presentation. But anything you need to add off the top?
Questions if there's any.
Okay. So questions from council to staff on item number 1 on the report before us? No questions. So that means we're ready to hear from any speakers to this. No one is registered, but I'll ask 3 times. Are there any speakers here for item number 1? Any speakers here for item number 1? Last call. Speakers here for item number 1? No takers. So given we have no speakers and we have not received any correspondence since 5 p.m., we will close the public comment period. Any final comments from staff, Mr. Clibben?
Nope.
No comments. Any final questions for staff? We're ready for a motion. Councillor Deal will move recommendations. Councillor Jang will second. Anyone want to speak to that? No speakers, so we'll go to the vote. Voting on screen for council on item number 1. And have we got everyone voted here? Councillor Stevenson? We have, yes, all 9 votes in, all in favor. And we have approved the motion, item number 1 recommendations. So we've concluded that. Thanks to staff for the work on that front. And we're on to item number 2. That's the text amendment, Zoning and Development Bylaw number 3575, amendment to the general regulations to delegate discretionary relaxation powers to expedite the delivery of low-cost housing for persons receiving assistance. Madam Clerk, can you please read the application and the summary of correspondence received?
This is an application by the General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability to amend Section 3, Administration of the Zoning and Development Bylaw to delegate authority to the Director of Planning or the Development Permit Board, as the case may be, to relax zoning provisions to facilitate the approval of developments where at a minimum of 70% of all dwelling units within the development are used for low-cost housing for persons receiving assistance. The proposed amendments specifically state that the Director of Planning or Development Permit Board's authority to relax zoning regulations does not apply in any of the city's RS and many RT zones. The General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability recommends approval. And since referral to public hearing, Council has received 1 piece of correspondence in support of the application, 8 pieces of correspondence in opposition to the application, and 1 piece of correspondence in the other category. And this represents all correspondence received up to approximately 4 p.m. today.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. And we have Paula Huber here, who is our Acting Assistant Director for the Midtown Division of our Planning and Urban Design and Sustainability Department. I understand you have a PowerPoint.
I do, Mr. Mayor.
We don't, item number 2. You want to go ahead with the presentation?
As soon as it comes up.
Okay.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. I'm here to present amendments to the zoning bylaw to expedite the delivery of low-cost housing. The right side? It's not. Do you have to turn it on? Left or right? Okay, there we go. The recent report to Council called Housing Vancouver recognized that the city is in the midst of a serious housing crisis. For example, there are currently about 2,100 homeless people in the city, and 600 of those are street homeless. The Housing Vancouver report voiced the city's commitment to take bold action wherever possible to address all aspects of the housing crisis. The province has announced significant funding for low-cost housing, specifically temporary modular housing, along with 24/7 supports for residents of new low-cost housing. This proposed amendment to the zoning and development bylaw is intended to introduce a new tool and compressed process so that we can speed up the delivery of low-cost housing when opportunities arise. This is one of many actions that the city intends to take to help house the city's most vulnerable citizens. The Vancouver Charter grants Council with the power to relax zoning regulations for the provision of low-cost housing for persons receiving assistance. Further, the Charter allows for the delegation of that authority to a city official or board. Through this proposed zoning bylaw amendment, we are asking for Council approval to utilize powers that are available in the Vancouver Charter. The new relaxation powers would eliminate the need for a two-step rezoning and development permit application for low-cost housing and allow relaxations to be considered as part of the development permit process. By utilizing these powers, the city can condense and speed up the approvals process for the delivery of low-cost housing so that we can act quickly and effectively when opportunities such as government funding programs arise. For the purpose of these amendments, low-cost housing for persons receiving assistance means social housing, except that at least 70% of the dwelling units must be occupied by persons eligible for either income assistance or a combination of basic old age security pension and guaranteed income supplement, and must be rented at rates no higher than the shelter component of income assistance. And the remainder must be occupied by households with incomes below housing income limits as set out in the current Housing Income Limits Table published by the BC Housing Management Commission or equivalent publication. The proposed relaxation authority would apply broadly to many sites across the city, but would not apply in RS and many RT zones or sites where the use would conflict with an official development plan. The memorandum to Council dated September 7th removes the RT8 zone from the list of zones where the relaxation powers cannot be applied. One example of the kind of low-cost housing that this amendment would help to facilitate is temporary modular housing. If the proposed amendments are approved, applications for low-cost housing would be processed through the development permit process. Relaxations for use and density could be considered as part of a development permit application. The well-established procedures for development permit would be followed. This includes neighborhood notification and the opportunity for the public to comment and make submissions. The approvals process requires the Director of Planning or the Development Permit Board to review all relevant policies and guidelines, including the updated temporary modular housing guidelines provided to Council with the memorandum dated September 6th. Anyone with an interest can provide comment, and that input would be considered in any decision. Operations management plans or good neighbor agreements are sometimes required as conditions of development permit to outline how a building would be managed. Beyond the standard development permit process, once funding is confirmed and applications are submitted under these new provisions, and we anticipate that most will be for temporary modular housing, VAHA and partners such as nonprofits and BC Housing would work closely with the community to listen to interests and concerns. The city and our partners are committed to ensuring that new low-cost housing is managed safely and responsibly. The city and our partners would hold community events and meetings to listen to feedback and work with the community to positively integrate new modular housing. A community liaison officer would be available to respond to queries and concerns leading up to and during construction until residents move in. The city would send regular project updates to residents and businesses near the sites. Update information would also be posted on the city's website. I have a couple questions that were provided at referral and also a few that were submitted to staff directly that I'm going to address. What are the opportunities for public input? I talked about that already, but to summarize, all proposals for low-cost housing seeking approval under this authority would still require a development permit process and follow the standard process steps. In addition, there's an enhanced layer of process that we would apply for temporary modular housing. What zoning provisions could be relaxed? The Vancouver Charter Authority in Section 565AE allows for any aspect of zoning to be relaxed. Why were the temporary modular housing guidelines approved in principle by Council at public hearing in December last year not adopted? The temporary modular housing guidelines were written at the time to apply to specific City of Vancouver owned sites that were being vetted for temporary modular housing last fall in November. Staff did not move forward with these sites, so the guidelines were not put forward for adoption. What are the specific changes that the December 2007 guidelines have compared to those put forward today? And has the public been notified? The temporary modular housing guidelines proposed in December have been modified to apply to a wide range of potential sites beyond those city-owned sites from last year, as the proposed motion would allow temporary modular housing development to be approved in many different zones. Moreover, if this motion is approved, the Director of Planning will have the authority to relax form of development regulations in different district schedules in order to enable temporary modular housing development. The updated guidelines were created over a short period of time to work more effectively with the broader scope of the relaxation provisions proposed under this bylaw amendment and have not been shared publicly prior to the agenda package release. And lastly, what criteria will determine whether there is a fit with a neighborhood? To ensure neighborhood fit, the temporary modular housing guidelines make the following recommendations. To follow predominant front yard and streetscape patterns, location and massing of buildings should mitigate overlook and shadowing, mature trees should be retained wherever possible, grade alteration should be minimized. The applicant needs to provide architectural detailing that works in our coastal region, such as deep roof overhangs and durable exterior materials. And we will work to achieve high quality, innovative architectural design with a strong interface with the public realm. That concludes my presentation and addresses the questions that we've been provided with to date.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Huber. We have two councillors on the queue with questions. Councillor Jang is first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I was reading some of the letters in opposition to the proposals, to the items here, and a lot of them have to do with the Copley Orchard, for example, some of the sensitivities around things like that. And folks are worried, for example, the city would just come in and raise the orchards or other public spaces currently used by some neighborhoods. I'm not, from what you said in your presentation, that does not seem to be the case.
I think I might, Dan Garrison, would you like to address that question?
Dan Garrison, Assistant Director Planning for Housing Policy. Certainly, there's a wide range of sites that are being evaluated now that could be available for the process that we're looking at, that are being evaluated for fit. As Ms. Huber mentioned, that those are certainly going to be some of the issues that are evaluated and looked at, some of the criteria that will be looked at in terms of fit with neighborhoods, the ability to maintain trees, et cetera. So, you know, we haven't identified yet which sites may or may not be candidates for this, but certainly in terms of how they will be evaluated, those will be considerations that will be taken into account.
Okay, so you'll be, so fit is a key component here in making sure neighborhoods are very happy with what's proposed.
Yeah, that's correct. Certainly there will be, we are doing this initiative to respond to some fairly serious needs in the community around homelessness. We have a large number of folks on the street, and that continues to be a really serious priority for the city. That said, we are looking at making sure we're really outreaching to the communities that are where these projects will be located.
Okay. The other issue is around tenanting, I know that's always an issue with different types of housing. Reading some of the letters, I'm getting a sense that folks are worried about, folks who are not getting treatment and they're addicts or street homeless. But from what the presentation by Ms. Huber is that Good Neighbor Agreements, for example, the province itself had said that they were going to provide money to ensure that there was going to be supports for these folks. And it's not all necessarily homeless folks. It could be people in transition, people whose places, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just kind of going from what I'm reading, folks who are, waiting for their new housing to be built, for example, things like that. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. That's correct. Thank you. So as we've seen before with projects that we've done in communities, we are really looking for ensuring that the project and the folks that are moving into the community fit well. Part of that, we would hope, as we're working towards our goal to achieve this with our provincial colleagues, that the funding that may be available through this would be adequate to provide the support services, and that would certainly be something that we would be looking at as a requirement when we look at things like operations management plans and good neighbor agreements. The funding and the support that's available in projects such as these being commensurate to the needs of the folks in the project and the ability to make sure they can integrate in the community is very important to us. The other thing is we would expect any projects like these to be operated by very experienced nonprofits that that are very accustomed to working with the kinds of folks. So yes, integration in the neighborhoods and the community is going to be a primary concern for the city and for all of the partners that we hope to move forward with on this.
Okay, so my final question has to do with the trial units, I guess we can call them, on the corner of Terminal Avenue and Main. They've been there now for about 6 months or so. And what's the feedback been like? I mean, I haven't received anything myself, but have you heard anything we should be aware of? Thank you, Dan.
Kathleen Llewellyn-Thomas, General Manager of Community Services. We've actually had good feedback. The people who are living in the new mods at Terminal are very happy there. In some cases, it's the nicest, newest housing they've ever been able to move into. And people in the community have responded well to the look of the homes in their community. They look like homes. They don't look like construction trailers or something like that. We took the extra step of adding the stunning mural on the side of the building. So the feedback has been very good, and the garden beside is still functioning fine.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And Councillor DiGenova, questions?
Thank you. I have a few questions. First of all, I'd like to know how many of these projected housing units will be accessible housing units. Understanding that persons receiving assistance, many of them do have mobility or accessibility issues. It's something that Councillor Affleck and I, both as liaisons to the Persons with Disabilities Committee and being a previous liaison to the Seniors Advisory Committee, I understand that mobility is certainly a challenge. So will that be addressing, will these units be addressing that, and what percentage?
Yeah, so we're looking at 10% of the units to be fully accessible units.
And that would be to adaptability level 3?
Now, I'm not sure on the adaptability level. We'd actually be looking beyond adaptability to full accessibility in those units.
Okay, thank you. My next question would be sort of in looking at how to expedite the units, moving faster with permits and with building housing is something that has come up through many reports and topics here. I understand that the rezoning fees have been raised a number of times in the past years, and I understand that the reason for that was so that we could expedite building. How are we doing so for just these types of units over other units? Does that mean there will be a shift now away from other things, or will more staff be hired to make sure that we meet the needs of projects overall? Just speaking to the name of the report.
We've been sort of preparing an internal staff team to anticipate this, so we don't imagine it's going to detract too much from our regular workload, as long as we can kind of phase it appropriately. And we're working with Vaha, for example, who's actually the vehicle to actually deliver these pieces so that we're anticipating those schedules. So I think it's within our management capacity to meet that without sacrificing the other schedules we have to meet.
A follow-up question to that, thank you very much for the answer, would be regarding staff. So would we be pulling staff from one area and putting them onto these projects, or would the goal be to hire new staff? Because I understand that one of the issues sort of in expediting housing and what we've heard is the permit process, and that we didn't have enough staff. So we needed to increase the rezoning fees so we could have more staff.
Right.
But then I understood from Ms. Krishna before that we hadn't hired more staff necessarily. So I'm wondering how many staff will be dedicated to this project and where they will be coming from.
Well, we are in the middle of staff discussions now with the city manager about our staffing loads in general, but I think with this specifically, what we'd be doing is just tapping the staffs that are already allocated to different parts of town. So these may not all end up in the same district, so it'd be kind of a marginal workload increase for those different geographically placed staff people. And I think it's, again, this increment is manageable. The overall workload is challenging.
Thank you. And then a more, I suppose, a broader question. With the change in government recently and understanding that the new Minister of Housing has said that there will be more dollars for municipalities in building non-market housing and in sort of expediting these types of units, we've seen an increase to certain types of allowances. We understand that there will be more increases coming from what the government has said. But I understand that this report that's coming before us at public hearing, your recommendations were planned long before that government came in with their strategy. Is there any risk that we may lose dollars because Vancouver's doing fine? They're doing this all on their own. What are we planning on asking the provincial government to contribute here?
In terms of this particular type of housing, the discussions have been with them the potential for about 600 modular units over the next year. Whether it goes beyond that initial allocation is something where there are active discussions around, and we're just kind of tracking and monitoring those. As you might imagine, policy and budget ideas are evolving rapidly in the new provincial government, so all we can do is sort of stay in touch and keep up with that and monitor its benefit and its effect on our staff.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Carr, questions?
Yes. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. My first question is just a really picky one. And thank you very much, Ms. Hooper, for answering my earlier questions at time of referral. But the first question, I just want to make sure we're correct in the reports. I note that in the yellow memo on page 1 of Appendix A, it talks about temporary housing, modular housing must be used as social housing per section 11.3.1. And in the staff report on page 3, it talks about, again, the use must be for social housing as per section 11.31. 31.1. I just want to make sure we are not incorrectly passing, like, which one is correct, 11.31.1 or 11.3.1? Maybe, you don't have to answer that now, just if you want to just make sure that we get the right one.
Is this on? Councillor, it's 11.31.
31, okay, so maybe the yellow memo could be, make sure it says 11.31.1. That'd be great, and conditional, that's on page 1. Thank you. My second question really, it follows up, although it's not exactly on the same focus as Councillor DiGenova, and it really is around the staff timing. What I'm wondering about is we often receive complaints about how long it takes to get a project delivered in the city. How much of that time is in a public hearing process versus the time to actually go through the development application process and conditions, the whole issuance of the development permit, et cetera? And so do we have a sense of that?
Yes, Councillor. The typical rezoning process is about 9 to 12 months. And that includes application, staff review, analysis, council report writing. There's weeks in advance of that, and then the hearing itself. And that's typically followed by a development permit, which could go 6 to 12 months, depending on complexity and the number of unresolved issues from the rezoning step. I think some of our applications now, we're trying to overlap rezoning with DP, and that can compress that. But I think on average, it's 2 years for rezoning and development permits. So what we're talking about here is not requiring the rezoning and then compressing that development permit process through pre-screening and testing and coordination internally, so that only development permits that we think are going to meet the criteria and things are generally worked out before the development permit comes in its complete form. So there's not a lot of back and forth.
Okay, so it's a 9 to 12 month savings by not going through public hearing? Is that what it is? Is that?
Well, I would say through 9 to 12 through not going through the whole rezoning process, because as you know, the public hearing is just sort of at the end part of rezoning. There's a whole lot of analysis and review through the whole rezoning process.
Yeah, my question is really pointed at wanting to figure out if there's any way if we could retain a public hearing process, retain the ability for the public to come to speak to us in council, to deliberate on an application. But really hone and speed up the process of the application itself, going through the preparatory stages for a public hearing and for the development permit stage. In other words, could we find, for example, a team of people who are experts in this, or become experts if they're not already? I think they already are. But is there a possibility to really collapse that end of the process, which it seems to me, I certainly get a lot of complaints about how long that takes currently.
I think the short answer is not not much. But what we can do is that for situations that appear controversial or where there are unanswered questions, given what I've heard as planning director, rather than make a decision on my own, in those cases I can refer this to the development permit board, which does take public testimony and has debate, as opposed to a public hearing in front of council. The point of all of this was to try to do an expedited process. And recall these are temporary and trying to meet that immediate social housing need that is temporary.
Right.
We were trying to balance those two.
Right.
Thanks.
Okay. I have 2 seconds left. Sustainability, energy. I didn't see anything in the guidelines for modular housing that had any focus on energy use or sustainability.
Kenny Gilbertson with VAHA. So we would be working closely with BC Housing on this. So I've got a cold. As we're assuming that the money would come through that route, but we'd be looking at targeting step 3 or higher of the new BCBC code that's coming out, and I believe that would be in line with the new Vancouver building bylaw for this size of project. But we can also build into the RFP and the procurement process any further requirements there are for that. So we are looking at making these as sustainable as possible, but whilst in remaining the sort of temporary modular nature. Answer the question.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
I can just add to that, Mr. Mayor. We've also seen manufactured housing has the potential to be quite efficient because it's built in a factory with quality controls, and each one is built the same way. So it's really quite an opportunity from our perspective, to innovate on construction and really push some energy limits opportunities in future years.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Reimer. Looks like last with questions.
Thanks. I wanted to clarify a couple things. So this doesn't apply, you're not looking for this discretionary authority across the city. There's a lot of zoning districts that would be exempt or not included from the looks of it. Are all the RS ones, and then RT 4, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, which essentially leaves only industrial, commercial, Falls Creek South, the DOD, and First Shaughnessy. And presumably, given that there's other guidelines and policies that apply in places like First Shaughnessy and Falls Creek South, it functionally wouldn't include those areas. So essentially, you're looking for industrial, commercial, and the low-rise apartment districts, the RM zones.
Yes, Councillor, there are many sites which would be eligible under these provisions, but there are many that are excluded, like the ones you mentioned. And I would note that the industrial sites and mixed employment areas that are protected through the regional context statement ODP would not be eligible because at this point, because residential is excluded. There are other areas where we have official development permit plans in place that might say exactly what has to happen on the sites, and we can't issue permits that conflict with a development permit. An official development plan. So there are some, I don't have a map that shows all those blacked out areas, but there are many, many sites included, but there are lots of areas there that would not be eligible.
Okay, well, I'm looking at a zoning map. So if industrial is also not included, you're talking about maybe 5% of the total land base of the city that this would apply to, essentially commercial and low-rise apartment zones.
Once you take out all the single family, you're right. We haven't done the math, but that seems about right to me.
Okay. And then that was actually my second question, was around consider all applicable policies and guidelines adopted by council. So this wouldn't override industrial land policies or the First Shaughnessy district policies or other things of that nature. Right. I'm bringing up First Shaughnessy because it's the only residential area in the city, a single family area that is not explicitly excluded from this policy.
Single family. Right. We're still deliberating on that, but we do have to look at the whole sort of quilt of policies to make sure that there's not some reason why a site would be captured or not. But that's mentioned in there. When we're doing our screening and establishing the criteria, that would be part of it.
Okay, helpful. Thank you.
Okay, that is, all the questions for staff, and that means we're ready to go to our speakers list, hear from members of the public on this. And we have 3 people registered. The first speaker is Mark Freeman, be followed by Sandra Medeiros. And you've got a little timer on your right there.
Perfect.
And welcome.
Hi. I'm here to oppose the amendment. We were here in December talking about temporary housing, I believe, for the first time. And at that time, there were a number of sites picked and chosen. They were going to be switched over and temporary housing would go in. And out of that conversation, afterwards, there was a bit of back and forth with staff here in the room and just outside, saying there'd be some consultation that would happen with people that were opposed, talking to us, getting more information on just what the plan was and giving it to us. And I've seen in a number of media where that consultation supposedly happened back in February. There was an article in the Vancouver Metro that said that we heard from communities and they need more information on who the tenants are, what the project will look like, exactly where the sites will go. And that was the city manager who was quoted at the time. That was back in February. At that point, I had heard nothing. Any of the other people I was here with at that time hadn't been contacted. 7 months later, which is now, 7 months since the article was published and now 9 months since the temporary modular housing thing last time in December happened, there's been no consultation. Nothing's happened. No one from the city has come to us and talked to us and asked us any questions or given us any information on the temporary housing. So that's my first sort of reason I'm opposed. The second reason is that this puts all the power within an unelected body. As Ms. Carr said, there would be no public hearings anymore. They would go away. This process would be sped up. And without public hearings, there's no opportunity for the public to come out and express concerns. In a realm where, change could happen. So those are my 2 main points. Any questions?
No questions for, oh, Councillor Reimer, you have questions?
Hi, nice to see you again. So this proposal wouldn't exclude public hearings on sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to articulate this. So it excludes residential areas, which means that there would still be rezonings required in a residential area. So the specific site you came to speak to previously would still have to come to public hearing.
So are comprehensive development plans excluded from the list also?
CD1 is not, but only a tiny slice of it's not the Copley Orchard, it's the paved area that was turned into the fire hall at
That's not part of the CD1 though.
it is the only part of a CD1. Everything else in Copley Orchard is zoned as RS something.
Oh, yeah, no, but that, I believe it's CD1 310 or something like that. Is the specific number for that space. But I'm not really concerned just about that one space. It's about not having public consultation.
Okay, so you would want it across 100% of you would not want a system that expedites on any land. It's not just residential areas you're concerned.
It's a balancing act of how to expedite it, but still have public input that's meaningful and consultation that's meaningful.
On 100% of the city land base.
I think so.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for being here tonight. And speaker number 2 is Sandra Medeiros, followed by Ellen Young.
Hi, I was just mostly concerned about the process with choosing sites. Getting a little bit more information here has been helpful, but I just want to make sure that there was more transparency, particularly if there were in residential areas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for coming to speak. Number 3 is Ellen Young.
Good evening. I grew up in Vancouver, and this is the first time I've attended a public hearing. I do not like public speaking, but when an introvert comes out, it means that they really care about an issue. And I'm here to oppose rezoning, or the amendment. And I'd like to point out that there weren't more people who submitted emails or who came out because they did not know about this public hearing, and they probably would not understand the impact of what this amendment could mean to their neighborhood. I would like to say that rezoning the land should continue to require public hearings. Relaxing such a rule sets out a dangerous precedent. I ask that City Council continue to be transparent and democratic and consult and listen to those affected nearby, instead of sidestepping political accountability by delegating controversial decisions to unelected city staff. Please do not change the bylaw. I request that City be more transparent in informing the public about where exactly they're planning to have the sites in the city. I want to share the story about my elderly uncle who is in his 80s and lives alone in a house on Copley and Vaness Street, across from Copley Orchard, at just a narrow back lane from where the city expressed interest in December in placing so-called temporary modular housing, which could be extended by another 5 years. I would like to share my concern for his well-being and those of his neighbors if the amendment passes and a TMH is built there without a public hearing in the future. Having grown up in East Vancouver beside Trout Lake, and continuing to be an East Vancouver resident, I know how generally peaceful my uncle's residential neighborhood is. There are no high security fences. There are families with children living there. There is a daycare and a school east of Vaness Street. Area residents sit and relax nearby. Suddenly installing a TMH, and I had read that possibly up to 2 buildings of 40 units could be situated somewhere in the city. That would be too much of a shock to the neighborhood system. And based on news articles, the potential tenants of TMHs are the hard to house, some of whom have mental health and addiction issues. Can you imagine my concern? All I want for my aging uncle is to live a tranquil, stress-free life in his own house for as long as possible during his twilight years. I don't want him spending any time or energy worrying about threats to his safety or his property. While I applaud City Council's efforts to reduce homelessness, I implore you to find more suitable locations elsewhere in the city that isn't a laneway away from people's yards. One cannot look to the TMH at 220 Terminal Avenue as an example that a TMH placed anywhere else in the city will be trouble-free. At the one on Terminal Avenue, there are 7 lanes of traffic on Main Street and 6 lanes on Terminal Avenue, as well as meridians, separating that building from other stores. It's a light industrial area, not full of single-family homes. Area residents and their glass towers are protected by multiple levels of gated security entryways. As well, there is public police data that there are recorded crimes on the 200 block of Terminal Avenue. So far this year on the 3500 block of Copley, where my uncle lives, there has not been any crimes recorded. And immediate neighbors of TMHs bear the greatest impact. If a TMH were to be placed right beside your aging parents or your grandchildren's house, wouldn't you hesitate more about its location as well? And that is why I am here. My uncle's neighbors by Copley and Van Ness Streets had strongly denounced the city's lack of consultation regarding TMH in their neighborhood last December during the public hearing. The city in turn promised consultation. Where is it? Now, quietly trying to pass this amendment without directly informing the residents near Nanaimo SkyTrain station or anywhere else throughout the city that this is happening or where TMHs could be placed is so deceitful. We need an open, fair process for selecting sites for TMHs across the city that involves listening to affected residents. I fear that giving discretionary power to city staff to impose TMHs goes against this philosophy.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. Very well timed. And you don't have any questions, but thank you for coming tonight to speak with council. Thank you. And I don't have any more registered speakers. Is there anyone else here to speak to item number 3? Or sorry, item number 2. Are there any more speakers here for item number 2? Final call. Are there any more speakers for item number 2? Seeing none, we will close the speakers list. And again, as we've had few or no public comments since 5 p.m., we'll close receipt of public comments and move on to hearing the closing comments and further questions of staff on this item. Closing comments from staff.
Mr. Mayor and Council, just after listening to the comments from the speakers, I just want to reiterate that the development permit process does provide different ways for the conversation to be elevated if necessary to the development permit board or for conditions to be put in the development permit, such as operation plans, management plans, good neighbor agreements, to mitigate any issues or concerns that are raised during the development permit process.
Okay, thanks for the closing comments and closing questions. Councillor Jang first. Ready for a motion. Councillor Carr, do you have questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm listening to the speakers and wondering if there's any way that the city can move forward in a public consultation process around some of the general concerns. I mean, I think maybe it appeared to me anyway, that some of these speakers did not realize that single-family zone areas were not included, for example. That there were limited numbers of limited areas of the city, very limited portion of the land base even of the city, that there could be questions in a development permit process. So I'm wondering if there can be some kind of public outreach on those specifics to enable the public to have an opportunity to ask questions and have the questions answered around this. I know, workload rise simultaneous with all the other work you're doing. Sorry.
So The intent of the proposed amendments tonight is really to put in place a mechanism that could be used to take advantage of opportunities to deliver affordable housing rapidly should the provincial government make that funding available and we're successful in proposals to them. Our absolute intention would be to, should that come to fruition, would absolutely be to follow up on a community engagement process on any sites that are identified to come forward. We'd be looking at obviously intensive community engagement around that issue to identify any concerns residents have and to do everything we could through the development permit process to address those issues, whether it be the operations of the building, the fit of the building in the neighborhood. So that's kind of the model that we're putting forward tonight, is to put in place a tool that we can use to expedite the delivery of affordable housing and follow up with an intensive consultation process as we start to understand more about what the program is going to be going forward.
Right. So most of the sites won't be in residential areas with the exception of some low-rise apartment zones. So how, when you say to get the residents involved, and it's maybe a commercial site or a light industrial site that allows some residential, I mean, who would be the residents that would get informed and how would they get informed by the city about the engagement?
Just say that we're mostly here speaking on behalf of the planning department, so we're essentially the regulator decider in this. We would not be the applicant, in other words, and so the province, BC Housing, working with city agencies like VAHA and community services, we would actually request that they go out early and talk, once they have some ideas about what sites they might want to do this on, to engage in pre-application consultation with neighborhoods. And so we can furnish them sort of our typical engagement circles and how that works, which is really kind of defined zone by zone, site by site. But I would look to them in making any decision or any recommendation to the development permit board that kind of early consultation process has happened. So again, it's all within a relatively speedier time frame than the typical, say, property rezoning project, but we would still look for that consultation piece before it comes to me for decision.
Is there any way, Mr. Kelly, that we could actually expedite that public consultation, anticipating that the provincial government will come forward with some funding to enable us to proceed with the modular housing?
I think it's possible. I think as more about that funding is known and as more site analysis is done on the part of those agencies that would be in the role of the applicant, we would certainly encourage them to do that once they know sort of the handful of sites that might actually be most workable, to get out there with an engagement strategy.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Jang, do you have questions now, or are you?
I'm ready to make
a motion. Councillor DiGenova, did you have questions? Okay.
I understood from the answer to my question before that BC Housing had considered, or I suppose the province had considered, the new government, I'm guessing it's through BC Housing, funding 600 units. Is there any commitment to funding those units? And if so, the other question I have is we're talking about social housing, but by talking about social housing, are we talking about these units meeting, like the rents for these units would be the exact amount that people received, if not less, on their shelter allowance? I want to make sure that we're clear. There's a difference in my mind between social housing and non-market housing.
Sure. Okay. So there were two parts of I think the first part was where are we at with the provincial government, and certainly there isn't a funding commitment to date to any number of units. The city did put forward the concept of 600 units in July when we reported back to you on the Housing Vancouver strategy. I think we're certainly encouraged by the recent budget update from the provincial government that identified significant funding for capital for 2,000 temporary modular housing units and a significant support service contribution funding to ensure that those units are available to folks who need them, who are vulnerable, and will have the supports to integrate in the community that they need. So I think we're certainly encouraged by that and working closely with them, but there is no funding commitment to date. As I mentioned, we're putting this in place to sort of to try to ensure that we're ready to go if and when that commitment is made. On the definition of social housing, the low-cost accommodation definition that we're putting in here now would require that the buildings meet the definition of social housing, and that additionally, a minimum of 70% of the units would be available to folks on income assistance at the equivalent of the shelter rate. So there are a couple of ways that could happen, either income assistance directly or a combination of supports like OAS and GIS for seniors, but that the rent would be equivalent to the income assistant rate of the day.
And the other 30%?
The other 30% would be required to rent to households with incomes below the housing income limits at rent geared to their incomes. And that's both to look at financial viability of projects and ensuring there's a bit of a mix there, and also social viability to look at, because we are looking at ensuring that if we are putting projects into sort of more residential settings, that they would be there would be a good mix of folks that it wouldn't be all people with significant challenges.
Okay. Another question, if we're talking about, and we've been talking about groups that face many barriers, and that this social housing would in a sense be specifically for those groups. I'm just wondering, have you already secured nonprofit operators? Where would the programming be funded through? Because I think what we'd heard from some of the speakers is there is concern. I think that we've seen in other projects that if the project's well managed, if there's a nonprofit operator or an operator through Vancouver Coastal Health or another organization or entity that can help, it's not just about housing. Housing's one component, but if these individuals aren't getting the supports that they need, that's often when those issues spill out into the community. So this is one piece. Are we seeing that hand in hand move forward with proper programming for these groups?
Yeah, well, two parts to that as well. I mean, one piece is on bringing the partnership together, and we certainly anticipate that would involve organizations like BC Housing on the funding side, but also experienced nonprofits that do work with people with challenges maintaining housing. So that would definitely be part of this. On the sort of regulatory side and the development permit processing, we would regularly, and would certainly in this case, be looking at operations management plans and ways to understand that the funding and support services that are going to be provided in these projects are commensurate with the needs of the folks who are going to be living there. So that would be a key element of the process.
And then one last question would be, as we move forward closer to the next housing reset update or replan update, as we reset things again, here staff is coming and asking us in council to give up our powers in a sense and give staff more leniency and power. Will we be seeing this with most of the housing reset that comes forward, or is this a very unique one-time ask to sort of expedite things? Because I understood that the housing reset wanted to expedite everything. So is this the only way to expedite housing? And if so, are we going to be seeing this more frequently come before us to ask us as council to give up some of our decision-making powers?
Gil Kelly, General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability. I think this is a bit of a special case in the sense that it's temporary and needed for immediate shelter. Much of what we're bringing forward in the housing strategy, the 10-year strategy that will be coming to you in late November, talks about ways to include affordability levels in traditionally built housing forms. And those would typically go through the regular development permit or rezoning processes. As you know, we have also developed, with council's permission, an affordable housing kind of fast track or a pilot project for 20 projects in the system at a time, where we have dedicated staff for affordable housing projects. And so that's an area that could also be beefed up. That doesn't have any particular public hearing or council discretion nuances. It's essentially a dedicated staff to move those through the system quicker.
Thank you.
Okay, that's your time, and it's over to Councillor Jang.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and I would like to move the recommendations outlined by staff, both in the report and in the yellow memo. First of all, I want to thank the speakers for coming out. I know that the Copley-Vaness issue that was back in December was very top of mind. I live in the neighborhood myself and heard it dead on, straight on, from not only here in Chambers, but out from my own neighborhood. A few things. From that, it's clear from what our staff have presented tonight that they heard very much the concerns of the various neighborhoods by limiting it, by not having it in RS zones, for example, ensuring that there is a full development permit process. And this is the transparency where you can still come and outline your issues and complaints. Everyone in an area would be notified. If a proposal was to go forward, you'd be notified, and you have the opportunity. It's very clear on the cards who to contact, how to contact, so you can send in all your comments, which I hear from our staff will be very well weighed. So we can avoid some of the issues that came up, I remember, in December. Also, we heard from our staff, so it's not in all, it's a very small number of zones that this can actually occur, so it won't necessarily end up in the back of your your aged uncle's place, for example. And certainly when it comes to who will actually be living there, it's very clear that it's not just, as some misperceptions may be, are people who are hard to house or people with mental illness or recovering from addiction issues, but rather some people are just low income. And so it's going to make a big difference about the different types of supports that may or may not be necessary. My experience over many years working in housing is that if they're just folks who are in low income, just finding it hard to get by, it's just like an apartment building. No big deal. If there are folks who require some extra support, we heard from the provincial government that with this housing money would come support money, and that's the first I've heard in many, many years. So that's a good sign, and our staff, as well as the various nonprofit groups, are very skilled at doing this. It reminds me very much at the time when we opened up our first winter shelters back in 2008. It was a bit of a schmozzle the first time until we got it right, and now we have them in Grandview Woodlands, for example. We didn't have any complaints at all this year, or for the last number of years, actually. So it can work when it's done properly, and I think that what's outlined by our staff for the process of doing this with the modular housing meets those tests, and I'm assured that I'm able to vote for this. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Jang. And to the motion, Councillor Carr.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Let me just start by saying that thank you to the people who came and spoke. Appreciate that, and to staff for the clear responses. You know, I don't know anyone in the city who doesn't want to see the homeless situation addressed, that is appalled by the fact that we've got more homeless than ever in this city, and I think it affects everyone, and people want to see solutions, and that's what this is about. Although a temporary solution, it's something to move towards the long-term housing that people need in the city that's affordable for the people who especially have very little income, but even for people who have just modest incomes. This is about expediting temporary modular housing, social housing, in a situation where we have a housing crisis and where we have a new, very refreshing opportunity in the form of a new government that is committed to providing money and support, not just money for housing, but money for supportive housing province-wide. And I've been to Victoria, so I've talked to people about this issue, before the change in government, since the change in government, and I get that sense of the desire in this new government to move very quickly, and they are looking for cities who can respond quickly. That's what I think is really behind this report. That being said, I love the public hearing process. I think it's a hallmark of democracy. But most development in the city doesn't go through a public hearing process. It goes through development permit process. So that won't be circumvented, and there will be opportunities. I love the fact that our Director of Planning, Mr. Kelly, said that he would be urging applicants who come forward to get out to the public early. I'm going to urge that our staff get out to the public early because I think there's some misinformation out there, like where these kinds of developments could occur within the city, how many are there, and you know, who would be involved in being housed. I think those bits of information are really, really important to allay people's concerns because in the absence of information, people can be worried about all sorts of things. So I would really like to see us get out with that kind of information. I really want to also encourage staff to come back to council if we need to be funding more staff to expedite the process so that the development permit times are shorter, because that is what expediting is all about. And also to work with BC Housing around the sustainability and energy efficiency elements of this housing. I have that confidence that that will happen. I also have confidence in the people of this city that they want to see a solution to homelessness. They just want to be well informed about what the solution will be. So that's our job, to get out there and make sure that they're well informed. So with that being said, I will support this.
Thanks, Councillor Carr. Councillor DiGenova.
Thank you very much. Councillor Carr made some very important points as to sort of weighing the benefits of moving forward and expediting the housing, but at the same time being very cautious and trying to protect public consultation, which I think is important. I do think there is a need. I will be supporting this cautiously, though, considering the comments from the speakers, but also the slippery slope that I see us getting into as we move forward with the housing reset. These units are most needed. The shelter units or the units for those facing the most barriers and who are literally lining up for their social assistance check. So I wanted to make sure that, and I wish it was more than 70% of the units would be rented at those rates, but right now we have 70%. So we're moving forward with something there. That being said, that I'm still concerned that with the housing reset, are we going to be seeing more and more moving forward this affordable rental project? We're going to come back to you with these type of projects. We're asking council to give staff more decision-making power. I think that our staff do an excellent job, but when I make these decisions, I understand that I'm not just making these decisions for myself, I'm making these decisions for councils of the future, and I'm setting a standard there. So I think that there are some concerns. That being said, I think that the benefit of housing people, and especially understanding that there will be accessible units, which I know the seniors and persons with disabilities were very concerned that as we move forward that they will be left out or left behind, as I've heard them say. So for those reasons, I'm happy to see this moving forward. That being said, I can't say that I completely agree with Councillor Carr that I think that this is perhaps sending a message to the provincial government. I really hope that in the over 2,000 units that Mr. Kelly had talked about, that we don't get left behind, because they say Vancouver's already building units. There's other municipalities that aren't. So we instead will allocate the funding there. So I carefully will be watching for that as we move forward here. And I also am very concerned, and I think it's important to note this because I will be asking about this in the future as we move forward. Get ready for council inquiries, because I do believe that our staff already have a huge workload, especially in Mr. Kelly's department. And I think that it's important to note that if we're not hiring more staff to do this, I certainly wouldn't want to see our staff burnt out. I wouldn't want to see other projects that perhaps those are families that are just scraping by, that can, I don't want to say afford market units, but are able to make it through. And if that starts affecting the costs, and it's a domino effect, I'm concerned if we don't see, if we see issues in other departments because we're allocating staff to this project. So I'd like to sort of understand how much staff time will be spent on this, where those staff will be coming from, and how that will impact
their other work. So without knowing that right now, it's hard to make a decision, but for the reasons that I stated, and in trying to make sure that we all move forward in meeting that goal of ending homelessness in Vancouver and making sure that we house people appropriately, I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor DeGenova, and Councillor Reimer is next.
Yeah, a couple of points. I think it's been well canvassed by Councillor Jang and Councillor Carr on many of the points I might otherwise have raised, but I did want to speak to two issues. One is the Copley Orchard site, which is indeed CD1. I just looked it up, although more than 70% of it is orchard, and I don't think staff, I think that was sort of the crux of the debate in December last year, was that there was no intention to put, after having established and invested in a community orchard, there was no intention to take it out and put housing there. Either way, staff did commit to the community to consult with them if that site were ever at issue again, and I heard them reaffirm that commitment tonight. And there were some preconditions to that consultation. One was that there actually be a definition of temporary modular housing, which we did back in December 2016. And the second was actually this piece, that we had sort of a regulatory framework in place. So this provides that opportunity for council. And it may be that staff never come forward with that site. So I'm a bit it's difficult for me to consider it specifically, other than in the broader question of, is the city discharging the commitments that it made on that site? And I feel that it has, in so much as the site isn't a question here tonight. The other issue that I did want to speak to was something that one of the speakers raised around democracy, and I think Councillor Carr, you spoke to it too, the importance of the public hearing process. Democracy very much rests on a majority rules concept, but it also very strongly speaks to, at least in Western democracies, that majority rules is equal to respect for minority rights. And although there is a significant minority of people who are experiencing homelessness, in the various forms that homelessness is experienced, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're living on the street. You could be quite precariously housed, and I would consider that equally homeless. To subject that to a majority rules process, I think, is not reasonable. Up until now, we haven't had to argue about this issue because we haven't had the money from a provincial government or a federal government to have this argument. But now that this argument is getting closer to being had, I did want to put it myself on notice to say that I think that when the choices between people sleeping in Trout Lake Park or Grandview Park or whatever street that they're sleeping on, or temporary modular housing, there's a very clear choice there, and anything that we can do as a city to expedite people getting into that housing is quite critical, while understanding that there is a well-established body of policies and guidelines and regulation and zoning that what we are being asked tonight to approve respects. So with that, I am quite happy to delegate discretionary relaxation powers, while understanding that we don't give up, we actually can't legally give up power, so we're delegating the authority. Should it be misused in any way, we always retain the right to take it back again. So I will be voting in favor of the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Reimer, and I have no further speakers. I will speak briefly to the motion in support, in strong support. Appreciate the input from speakers and appreciate all the work that staff have done on a very expedited timeline, noting, as Councillor Carr said, we have a provincial government now that looks like they are very interested in supporting our efforts to get housing for people who need it the most here in Vancouver. I think a lot of good points have been made by Councillor Reimer, Councillor Carr, everyone who spoke to it. And back to Councillor Jang, who's been working hard on this and intimately involved in the work that we've had in the past on this. I think obviously every site is unique, and we've had good success with the main and terminal site as a pilot project. I think the Development Permit Board will certainly be sensitive to concerns and the different conditions with different sites around the city, but obviously the city has a history for many years now of making sure that we do make housing, particularly for those most vulnerable, available around the city, and at the same time are sure to work towards making it work within the context of each neighborhood. So think we've had great success on this to date, and when there have been challenges, those have been addressed forthright by everyone working on them as things move along. So I have absolute confidence in the process, given who's around the table and council's overarching oversight in the long run here. I do think this is very time sensitive. Winter is coming, as we hear all the time now. We can feel it in the air, certainly, but we are in the throes of a crisis with affordable housing, and many people in very difficult housing conditions, as bad as sleeping outside, but certainly lots of people in housing units that are not meeting their needs at all. And I think that's this modular housing has the potential to make a huge difference for a lot of people while we get the permanent housing built. I'm encouraged by the commitments we're hearing from the provincial and federal governments, at least the intentions to invest more significantly in permanent housing. That is the solution to the crisis that we're in right now. We have to be building more of that. I know we have thousands of units in the pipeline right now. They're not coming fast enough to meet the urgent needs that we have right now for people. So this is a temporary solution. I think it's important that we take this opportunity on and do our absolute best with it, with eyes wide open as to what challenges there are, and making sure that it works throughout the city, so that we can address the problem and address the issue of making sure that residents and neighborhoods are involved in the process as we move along. So with that, anything further, Councillor Jang? We're ready for the question. Okay, on screen, council can vote now. On the motion is moved by Councillor Jang. Okay, we have all 9 votes in favor. Unanimous support for that, and that carries. Moves on to the next steps. Thanks again to those who were here to speak and who had input, and staff for your work on this. And that is item number 2 of 9 tonight. And item number 3 was withdrawn from the agenda, so we do not have item 3 to deal with. Council, I'm going to suggest, though, we're at 7:30. We have, with items 4, 5, we have no speakers registered. We have 4 registered on item 6. And on item number 8, we have 23 registered. And item number 9, we have 23 registered. So at this point, we have close to 30 people up till the number 8. Just looking at the numbers right now, I think it's either going to be a very late night if we're going to hear from all the speakers who are registered, or we are going to have to make a decision. I think we should make a decision soon as to whether we hear all the items or we make a decision on referring some to Thursday to be fair to those who are waiting for these later items. So Councillor Deal, do you have an idea for?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Robertson. Given the number of speakers, and given that we want to make sure people don't have to stay here, ourselves or the speakers, until the early hours to hear from them all, I would move or recommend that we take item number 9 and move it to the Thursday evening slot, which we already have reserved for backup for this public hearing.
So we hear
from the speakers.
We extend tonight to hear
speakers through 8. And we may then choose to defer the decision on 8 in particular. And then hear from the speakers from number 9 on Thursday.
Okay.
Is that all the language I need for that?
I think, Madam Clerk, does that cover the bases? Which means item number 9 moves to Thursday officially, and we will go until we finish all the speakers for 8. For everything up to 8, we will hear. We may be here well past 10 o'clock to hear everyone up to the end of 8. But number 9, we won't be.
That we won't make a decision tonight.
Number 9 will be on Thursday, starting at 6 p.m. Moved by Councillor Deal, seconder for that. Councillor Louis, to that motion to adjust our agenda to hear speakers. Councillor Jang.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Don't know if I'm personally going to make it past 10 o'clock. I do have a number of health issues I must take care of, and I know we have a full day tomorrow and Thursday, and I've been up since 6 a.m. working, so to go far beyond 10 o'clock is probably beyond my physical limits. I'll just put it out there right now. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor DeGenova.
Mr. Mayor, I can commit to go till 11 o'clock. I won't be able to go longer than that tonight due to having a new baby. And I probably will be up all night. But I also I was hoping for clarification from Councillor Deal, because I understand that there may be more speakers than are even on the list here for number 8. So there could be speakers that sign up or come throughout that process. Are we committing to hearing from the registered speakers or to closing off the speakers list, because there could be several more speakers out there that aren't on the list, which we've seen before? So just a question of clarification. Thank you.
Right now we have 23 registered, so a couple more registered tonight on top of who was registered prior to the meeting starting. So we have 23 plus 4 that are registered on to speak on item number 6. So we have, this would mean hearing from 27 speakers, which is several hours. Well, I would guess between 10 and 11 p.m. we'd finish hearing from people. Councillor Deal, did you?
I could entertain a hard stop at 11 if we still have a few speakers left, if that's what the will of council is.
Might need it for quorum if.
I can put the hard stop.
Hold on. Okay, so we want to amend to hear speakers up till 10 p.m.
Yep.
So we may not finish the speakers on item number 8. Okay, sounds like that's cutting to the chase here rather than extending the debate. We're going to amend that to go to 10 p.m. So that means, I think, well, that means we will definitely not hear from speakers on item number 9, and we may not finish speakers on item number 8. We'll see how that goes, but that's where we're landing. Okay, anyone else want to speak to that? Councillor DeGenova.
For another point of clarification, just because I know that we have, as Mayor and Council, received requests before, if we're moving item number 9 to Thursday evening, which I'm totally amenable to and I will support, will we start with item number 9 or will we finish item number 8 speakers first?
We would finish number 8.
Okay,
yeah.
I just thought it's important to clarify for those people who've come.
Yeah, and for those who are on the list for number 8, we'd probably have an indication 9 o'clock or so whether you're going to make it inside 10 or you'd be early on Thursday evening, closer to 6 o'clock on Thursday. Okay, we ready for the question on that motion? All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. So that's the game plan. We will go till 10 o'clock tonight. Item number 9 will be on Thursday evening, and we'll get through hearing as many speakers as we can on item number 8 up till 10 p.m. And it should be a good chunk of the people who are registered to speak to number 8. Apologies to those who came tonight for item number 9. This is how these public hearings can go when more people show up on all the items, looking for opportunities to speak. So. Okay, we're ready to move on to item number 4. This is text amendment East Fraser Lands Official Development Plan, the Development Phasing Amendment. Madam Clerk, can you read the application summary of correspondence received?
This is an application by West Group Properties to amend the East Fraser Lands Official Development Plan bylaw to adjust Section 6 Development Plan Phasing to allow development of the Town Square Precinct to proceed concurrently with the Waterfront Precinct. The General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability recommends approval subject to conditions as set out in the summary and recommendation of the public hearing agenda. Council has received no correspondence on this application since it was scheduled for public hearing.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And we have Kirsten Robinson here, Vancouver South Division, to present the application, and we don't have anyone registered, so I think we could.
Would you like me to waive the presentation? I did prepare one if you'd like it.
I think with no speakers, and given there are lots of speakers to later items, we can waive the presentation. Thank you for preparing one. And just go to questions. Councillor Carr?
Yeah, I submitted questions. I just wanted to make sure those were going to get answered.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, we can start with that. The answers to questions.
You submitted were for the official development plan 10-year review.
Yes.
Which we answered in June when we brought forward the one-year work program to do that one-year review of the official development plan. And that was to cover off the changes and updates to the plan related to the shoreline, related to the waterfront redesign, and related to proposal to add density to Area 3. So I didn't bring a presentation for those because those were related to that other item.
Right.
I think the one thing you did ask, though, that relates to this is you had asked about the complete community nature, and did we still achieve that? And I think the answer to that is yes, we're still, West Group's already designed and is under construction to build the 4 parcels that make up the town square, and those are the parcels that provide the grocery store, the drugstore, the liquor store, some of those essential amenities for the new neighbors that are moving in. What this amendment does, it allows for infill of some of the other town square parcels that were intended to come later in the phasing plan. And it just gives us a little bit more time to do a detailed design of the high street right down to the waterfront.
Did you have any further questions, Councillor Carr?
I actually did. So I had a third question, and that was at page 5 of the report, notes that the public has expressed concern over loss of services. And I didn't understand quite what that meant.
When we took the package of amendments to the public in March, it included more things than the phasing plan. It also included change of use on 2 parcels from office to rental housing, and it included, and so those office parcels, the concern was that those are services that wouldn't be provided if it became rental housing. We're still going to address those changes through the 10-year review of the ODP in a more comprehensive way.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any more questions? No more questions for staff, so we'll go to our speakers list. No one registered, but I'll check. Are there any, actually, I didn't give the applicants a chance to say something. Are our applicants here? Did they wish to make any initial comments? No comments unless there's questions. Okay. We did not have questions, so we'll go to speakers. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on item number 4? Are there any speakers here for item number 4? Last call. Speakers for item number 4? Seeing none, we will close the speakers list, and with little or no correspondence since 5 p.m., we will close public comment period. Any final comments from staff? Any final comments from applicants? We're good. And any final questions from our council? No questions. Councillor Louis moves recommendations, and Councillor Deal seconds. Any debate? We're ready for the question in record time. On item number 4, council can vote now. Okay, we have all 9 votes in favor of the motion moving the recommendations. So we have concluded and approved item number 4. Thanks to staff and to our applicants for bringing that forward. And good luck with next steps. We are on to item number 5. And that is the rezoning for 6137 Cambie Street. That's the Chinese Presbyterian Church. Madam Clerk, can you please read the application and summary of correspondence received?
This is an application by GBL Architecture Inc. to amend CD1 District for 6137 Cambie Street, the Chinese Presbyterian Church, to increase the floor space ratio from 0.635 to 3.08 and the height from 9.1 meters to 25.6 meters to permit the development of a 7-story mixed-use building with a replacement church, private childcare, and 20 for-profit affordable rental housing units. The General Manager Planning, Urban Design, and Sustainability recommends approval subject to conditions as set out in the summary and recommendation of the public hearing agenda. Since referral to public hearing, council has received one piece of correspondence in opposition to the application. This represents all correspondence received up to approximately 4 p.m. today.
Thanks, Madam Clerk. And we have Zach Bennett here, a planner of Vancouver South Division, to present the application. No registered speakers again.
Yeah, Zach Bennett, Vancouver South. As you note, there are no registered speakers. The presentation is prepared. If council would like me to either waive or go with a shortened one, I'm happy to oblige.
Yeah, I think we're okay with waiving for that. So we'll thank you for that, Mr. Bennett. Is the applicants, Stuart Lyon, GBL Architects, here wish to? Okay, thank you for being here. And so we'll go to questions. Any questions for either staff or the applicant team from council? No questions. Okay, we're ready to go to speakers list, which has no one registered, but I'll call 3 times. Are there any speakers here for item number 5? Are there any speakers here for item number 5? Last call, speakers for number 5. Seeing none, we'll close the speakers list. And as we've had little or no comments since 4 p.m., we'll close the public comment period. And final comments from staff, anything? Any final comments from the applicants? No. Any final questions from council? Okay. Councillor Louie will move recommendations. A seconder for that? Councillor Jang. And Councillor Jang, did you want to speak to that? Yes. Okay. Speaking to the motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I just wanted to say how enthusiastic I am about this rezoning proposal. I'm not in a conflict of interest, but years and years ago, I was a member of the Chinese Presbyterian Church that used to be on Pender Street. What? No, Kiefer Street, where the Maxim's Bakery was. And I became a Buddhist, so no longer in a conflict. But I remember you guys moving up to Cambie Street, and look forward to seeing the new building when it's done. Thank you. It didn't take.
I don't know. To the application. That's it. Okay. Any other speakers on this item? We're ready for the question. So we can vote on screen on item number 5, rezoning for 6137 Cambie Street, Chinese Presbyterian Church. And we have all 9 votes in favor. Unanimous support for the motion, moving the recommendations, and we've concluded item number 5. Thank you to staff and the applicants for bringing that forward. And we're on to item number 6, and this is the rezoning for False Creek Flats Plan implementation, policy, and bylaw amendments. Madam Clerk, can you please read the application and summary of correspondence received?
This is an application by the General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability to amend the Zoning and Development Bylaw to bring forward the zoning changes, consequential amendments, and accompanying development policies and guidelines to manage future development as laid out in the Falls Creek Flats Plan, Area Plan. The proposed provisions include a new rezoning policy for the Falls Creek Flats, a new FC-2 district schedule, amendments to the I-2, I-3, IC-3, and MC-1 and MC-2 district schedules, and amendments to the regional contact statement official development plan. The General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability recommends approval. Since referral to public hearing, Council has received 3 pieces of correspondence in support of the application, 25 pieces of correspondence in opposition to the application, and 1 piece of correspondence in the other category. This represents all correspondence received up to approximately 4 p.m. today.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And we have Gil Kelly here, our General Manager of Planning and Urban Design and Sustainability, to kick things off.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be very brief, and then I want to turn it over to Corey Dobson, who's been the project manager for this plan in planning. Just to remind you that you adopted this plan just a few short months ago, and we've been busy working on the implementing regulations and guidelines, and that's what's before you tonight. So these hew very closely to what we described in the plan at a higher policy level, and these are really filling out the details of that. We do recommend that we go forward with a presentation since there are speakers here tonight, and you may have questions for us as well on some of the details. And we do have both staff and economic consultants here as well who helped us on some of the zoning constructs that you'll hear about from staff in just a moment. So I think I'll leave it there and just turn it over to Corey. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Mayor, members of council, thanks so much. Corey Dobson, Planning, Urban Design, and Sustainability. So as Gil mentioned, this presentation today and the report before you is really about implementing the zoning to implement the Falls Creek Flats Area Plan. What I'll do today is I'm going to give you a quick reminder summary of what the plan included and encompassed. I'm going to talk briefly about the strategic approach around developing the district schedules before you today, and then I'm going to actually pass it off to Linda Gillen to walk through some of the zoning changes or the details of the zoning changes. Just to quickly kind of reorient you with the plan, when we brought the plan in May, we had really focused the strategy and the policies around delivering these five keys, which we saw as essential for unlocking the economic potential of the area. Delivering the right kinds of programs to support the businesses of the area, delivering the spaces, places, connections, and environment that would help support the vision that we brought forward in May. There's a lot on this screen, and so I apologize. Obviously, it's tiny text for anyone here, but this was one of the summary slides that we brought forward as part of the plan. Things to really take away, which we'll touch on today through the zoning. There's two big focuses. One was around really looking to intensify our innovation economy and high intensity employment opportunities around transit, which is in the blue in the western and southern ends of the Falls Creek Flats. And the second kind of high level approach was looking to how we secure and intensify the base economy, core industrial, light industrial areas in our city. Throughout here, there's obviously a blending of that line, but those were the two high level approaches. Obviously, this area plays a huge role in terms of our city's arts and cultural production. There's a lot of food economy type businesses in here. And if you look at kind of the structure of the plan, we were really looking at establishing focuses, amenity and public focuses around sort of the institutional anchors. Obviously, Emily Carr, University of Art and Design, opened their doors this past month to kind of welcome in their first batch of students. So that's obviously a huge driver that's altering the landscape here. And as well, we have the policy statement in place for a future rezoning at St. Paul's. So with those two sort of large institutional anchors, we're looking at what kinds of zoning can we put in place to really unlock the potential of these zones. Moving to the next slide, what I wanted to touch on just really briefly is a bit of the strategic approach in how we formulated the district schedules before you. When we're talking about kind of the strategic intent of those schedules and the accompanying policies and guidelines, again, it was about establishing zoning that would support that vision of a high intensity, diverse economy throughout the area, looking at how we can incentivize and introduce secure light industrial and arts production spaces, exploring ways to support things that might be just a bit outside of the market's ability to deliver around economic enabling, amenity spaces, sort of economic infrastructure, if you will, to support the incubation acceleration of local business. And one of the things that I think as well we had heard a great deal from the development industry in particular and others was really about creating a certainty in land use development and zoning rights. And through this plan, we tried to minimize to the greatest degree possible the need for site-specific rezonings. When we're looking at the kinds of employment that we were trying to support in this plan, it really does reach a broad spectrum as highlighted here with kind of the central dots of this map. And this is sort of showing a broad range of the various uses and opportunities embedded in the various schedules before you today. As well, on the right side of the screen, we've introduced in strategic locations opportunities for some additional housing to support a fuller, more vibrant mix in certain areas where it made sense. And also on the left side, the piece that I had already touched on is some of the stuff that sits a bit outside of market provision around the economic supports and that infrastructure to support the intentions of the Falls Creek Flats plan. When we're looking at developing the schedules that we brought before you, one of the things we were looking at is how can we leverage those higher value uses to really secure the lower value, for lack of better words, the light industrial and the artist spaces that we desire to see in the area. And so a lot of the structuring of the district schedules that Linda will walk through addresses that desired outcome. When we were looking at developing the specific schedules, and as well as we went through the planning process, we'd engaged Coriolis Consulting, and Jay Wallenberg's here to represent them should council have any specific questions around the financial and land economics of what's before them today. But what Jay and his team helped us do was to understand how best can we achieve the outcomes that we were shooting for in the plan through the tools that were at our disposal. In terms of establishing that certainty and kind of embedding our desired outcomes into the district schedules, we really tapped into kind of these two tools that I've highlighted up here. The first is around kind of inclusionary economic zoning. And what we're looking at there is district schedules where we provide an option for additional higher value uses, often in the form of additional general office in the case of the False Creek Flats, but there's a couple other options. And what we're looking at is you can achieve some additional higher value uses with the delivery of those desired lower value uses. Lower value use is a terrible term. I've got to come up with a new one. But essentially securing that light industrial and arts production space we're looking. So we've used that one tool. The other tool, and we've used kind of either or and sometimes both, is bonus density. And this tool, you'll find it in the district schedules for two different areas, two different sub-areas in the package before you. And what a bonus density tool looks at is establishing a base zone, which is really the kind of the standard entitlements, if you will, and then it puts in an additional option for the landowner to achieve additional density through the contribution of in the case of the False Creek Flats, what we've structured as an amenity share contribution, which we're looking at directing towards those economic enabling activities, that kind of economic infrastructure, if you will. So that's the tool that these are the two tools that Linda will touch on as we go through the various schedules. One of the things around the bonus density structure, which I think is important to highlight for council, is really what we're doing with this tool is establishing or kind of maintaining kind of that base land value. So looking at what was existing zoning and what is the kind of base value of the zoning moving forward. The goal is to sort of create a bit of stability there. When we're talking about the bonus density, it really is over and above that base zone entitlements. And so a big conversation and a big question that we had to work through with our consultant on this is what's the appropriate contribution that would address the lift in the land value from the zoning change, recognizing that there's a desire to do two things here. One is to ensure development viability, and the other is to make sure that additional density is helping to contribute to the costs of accommodating that growth. So that's the structure and that's the tool that we're utilizing in two sub areas within or two specific zones within the False Creek Flats. Another thing we had heard from you folks at the time of plan adoption was to look at how do the district schedules start to really activate and animate the ground floor in the False Creek Flats. How do we create the amenities and the opportunities for people either working in the area or passing through to get a cup of coffee or places to eat or to socialize or to buy goods that are needed. So throughout the development of the various schedules before you, our team took a kind of a zone-specific approach to how best to activate the ground floor in the various sub-areas. It includes a variety of different approaches. Definitely we're seeking to encourage the spill out of industrial activities, introducing a lot of opportunities around accessory and local serving retail, restaurants, breweries, cafes, and the like, farmers markets. And really, it's about really trying to celebrate the industrial role of the area and trying to encourage as many opportunities as possible for the public to interact with that industrial role of the False Creek Flats. Another element which is embedded throughout is we look to how do we incorporate placemaking opportunities throughout the False Creek Flats through the use of public art, street furniture, lighting, and signage. And these types of things will be things that we're looking to incorporate through future developments. So with that high-level overview, I'm going to pass it over now to Ms. Gillen to walk through some of the specifics of the zoning changes.
Thank you, Mr. Dobson. I'm Linda Gillen, planner with the Downtown Division, and I'll now cover the staff recommendations and zoning changes proposed as part of the plan implementation. So just as a reminder, this slide shows a summary of the staff recommendations before Council this evening. We're recommending that Council rescind the existing rezoning policy and adopt a new rezoning policy. We're bringing forward amendments to 4 existing district schedules, along with a new FC2 district schedule, and also accompanying urban design policies and consequential amendments. So this map illustrates what would be the future False Creek Flats zoning map. And as a reminder, staff are not recommending zoning changes this evening to the areas that are highlighted in red. This includes the future St. Paul's Hospital site, which will be a significant influence on change in this area and will be addressed through a separate site-specific rezoning application. So I'll now take you through the changes being proposed to implement the False Creek Flats plan. So 2 new sub-areas are being introduced into the I2 area of the flats. And for sub-area A, the focus is really on supporting and strengthening this core industrial area. We're not bringing forward any changes to the height or density, and we're moving some of the less intensive employment uses in this area. For sub-area B, the goal is to build on opportunities for intensified job space along the Terminal Avenue spine. And this includes the option for additional height and density up to 120 feet and 4 FSR, which I'll discuss more in the next slide. So this slide shows just one of the many scenarios for how the proposed inclusionary economic zoning might work. The base zoning still allows a range of options for landowners as part of a 3 FSR development, and that would include general office, but they can also explore opportunities for additional creative products, manufacturing and office uses, as long as 1 FSR of light industrial or artist studio space is provided. And in sub-area, in the I3 area, we're looking at 2 new sub-areas. The goal in sub-area A is to support the growth of the innovation economy in the areas south of National Avenue and east of Station Street. Increases in height and density are proposed to 150 feet and 5 FSR, and I'll provide more detail on these changes in the next couple of slides. So consistent with the plan, staff have added 2 FSR of bonus density in this area. And this would provide landowners with the option of achieving a total FSR of 5 with an amenity share contribution of $10 per square foot for any additional floor area over the base maximum of 3 FSR. This contribution would support community center space for economic enabling activities in the flats. There would be a range of options available for landowners in this area of the flats. And again, this slide shows just 3 possible configurations. That would include the base density of 3 FSR, or a couple of scenarios up to 5 FSR, both including an amenity share contribution. And a landowner could also include up to 4 FSR of general office, again if 1 FSR of light industrial or artist studio space is provided. And in the MC1 area, we're proposing a new sub-area north of Malkin Avenue and south of Atlantic Street. The goal here is really to provide a residential industrial transition with job space at street level on Malkin and opportunities for new social housing or secured market rental housing along Atlantic Street above. A new sub-area is proposed in IC3, which would allow additional height and density up to 100 feet and 4 FSR if 100% market rental housing or 20% social housing is proposed. And there's also the option for landowners of developing under the existing IC3 provisions in this area. So over the next few slides, I'll review the changes proposed for the Innovation Hub area of the Flats Plan. The goal here is to establish a new mixed-use neighborhood, including opportunities for arts production and the food economy, and a mixture of market and non-market housing. This area includes some privately owned sites, along with a substantial amount of city-owned land, and we're proposing 5 unique sub-areas here. So the goal for sub-area A is to support opportunities for additional job space next to transit and close to the future St. Paul's Hospital site. Changes include increasing the employment density up to 7 FSR with a height of up to 170 feet. And moving south of Terminal Avenue, this slide shows the city-owned blocks of the Innovation Hub. Zoning changes in this area would allow opportunities to build on the food production and existing arts hub in the area, with opportunities for new public space and a mixture of market and non-market housing. South of Industrial and First Avenue is sub-area E, And the goal here is to achieve diverse mixed-use development with opportunities for residential, which I'll review more in the next couple of slides. So as a reminder, the existing zoning in this area is IC2, which is a fairly low-intensity light industrial zone. And consistent with the plan, staff are bringing forward a range of options for landowners in this area. There's the option of redeveloping with 3 FSR of job space, or they have the option of including 2 FSR of general office if 1 FSR of light industrial or artist studio space is provided. We've also added a couple of options for residential use in this area, which I'll speak to in this slide and the following slide. One option is to include up to 3.5 FSR of secured market rental with an amenity share contribution of $120 per square foot for a total of 6.5 FSR. So just as a reminder, again, this amenity share contribution would support community center space for economic enabling activities in the flats. And a landowner could also include up to 3.5 FSR of residential with half of social and half as market strata, with no amenity share contribution anticipated under this residential option. So this map shows the 3 unique areas where the new rezoning policy would apply and where we'd expect site-specific rezoning to occur. This includes the site north of the new Melkin, the Rail Yards Heritage Hub, and the Cultural Hub in the northeast corner of the flats. And consistent with the intent of the plan, we're also bringing forward urban design and development policies. These are a key element of the plan implementation. They build on the zoning to provide a transition to surrounding areas, to encourage active ground floors, functional workspaces, and a good public realm in this area of the city. We're also bringing forward an amendment to the Regional Context Statement Official Development Plan so that it's consistent with the recommended zoning changes before Council this evening. So in summary, staff recommend that the new rezoning policy, zoning amendments and ODP amendments, along with the urban design and development policies, all be approved to support implementation of Council's False Creek Flats plan. Staff are available to answer any questions that Council might have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. And we go now to questions from council. I've got myself first on the queue. Just a question specifically about the retail, and I'd raised this when this was last before council and when we were considering the whole enchilada a few months ago. And just noticing that I think where I was hoping would go on retail and the opportunities for good retail that will serve, a local serving retail that will certainly serve the thousands of students there on the flats at Emily Carr and VCC, as well as all the new residents in the housing that's some of which is underway, but lots to come. Just concerned about what I see in terms of restrictions on the retail that's there and not being what will work for particularly the younger population who are there, and noting especially the piece about no music being allowed. Can staff just explain some of the rationale around the types of retail and the music language that's in there?
Yeah, I think for the approach on the retail side of this it was really about 2 parts. One, making sure that the amenities that are needed are available, and the second is ensuring that the industrial character of the area remains, and some of the ground floor uses can continue to serve the industrial function of the area. So with each of those, I think there's an anticipation that and there's an allowance for a certain amount of accessory retail in any of the industrial uses. So in the False Creek Flats as good examples, I mean, you have your Beta 5 chocolates and others like that where they're manufacturing on site, but they also have a retail component. So that's something I think the plan is trying to encourage. All of the districts have some element of retail, whether it's a smaller element in terms of the local serving, limited food service type retail, restaurants kind of throughout in the various districts. Most areas, I believe, allow for music, and perhaps we've missed one. I'm not sure. And was there a specific zone in particular that is being referenced? Was it Great Northern Way?
Yeah, the Great Northern Way.
So I guess part of the CD1 for Great Northern Way was not something that was a part of the Falls Creek Flats planning scope. So that recognized at the outset, recognizing that CD1 was in place. So it wasn't really part of the scope of the study. If it's that CD1 in particular, but in the others that we've brought forward, we've tried to incorporate as many of those uses as I've touched on as possible.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I'll go through and just in terms of concerns around that and the district schedules as well, just to make sure. Just want to make sure that what we enable there is the kind of retail that makes sense and enlivens. We want vibrancy. It's lots of students and mixed use. So good to see the right match for retail. So I'll leave it there for the time being and go to Councillor Reimer next on the queue.
Thank you, Mayor Robertson. Well, I'm going to follow up on that because I happen to have it right in front of me that
Good.
Sorry. It's a bit of a bugbear, I have to admit, because it is, with all the attention and focus that we put on in the area around having it be a transportation corridor and people using active transportation to come through, to not be able to stop if you need a Band-Aid for those of us who occasionally wipe out on our bikes, or you want to go to a music show. It's an arts or university right there. And the specific provision says that the premises include not more than 16 indoor or outdoor seats, and that live entertainment is not available. In fact, the pictures you showed in the PowerPoint, as I was counting people, none of them seemed like they would actually be allowed under these guidelines. So I might be misreading the guidelines, but I would like to get a better understanding of that. I'm also interested in the list, which I'm reading pages 18 through 20 in Appendix B. I didn't see anything that would allow for that kind of retail, like if you need some kind of toiletry product, which students may or may not need when they're in long hours at a school, or if you wanted to, sort of what we commonly think of as retail. I'm having a hard time articulating it, but the kinds of things you might get, stationary products, those kinds of things. I'm specifically thinking of where Emily Carr is located now on Granville Island is a very successful industrial use retail mix environment, and whether or not something a bit more like that might be possible through the district schedule. Sorry, that was a bit of a rambling question. We have some speakers, so if you wanted to answer it at the end after we're done the speakers, that's fine. So then the other question I had was around public consultation. I did get a couple of panic letters today that people felt this report had first been posted on Friday. I remember reading this report back in July, so I guess I'm wondering how much the public was made aware. I know there was a long process that led up to the plan coming in May, but then what happened between May and today in terms of the public being made aware of the report we referred in July and then this evening's public hearing?
So I think back in July when this was referred, we would have notified the listserv of the referral in terms of when the final drafts of the bylaws were up.
Yeah, and just to follow up on Mr. Dobson's point there, we would have used our standard notification process in advance of the public hearing, so including ads in newspapers, postcards to property owners, and an email to the existing Falls Creek Flats listserv. We also would have posted the material on the Flats website, and I believe the report would have been online for 1 week before the referral date, which was July 25th in this case, I believe.
And I understand that you wouldn't have notified about the public hearing prior to the referral of the report, but the council meeting at which it was referred, would those people who were engaged in the planning process been made aware that it was coming up for referral in July?
They were notified following referral.
Following referral, but not prior to referral?
Possibly not, no.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
All right, Councillor Deal, questions?
Yes, thank you very much. At the referral, I referenced concern about existing artist spaces and low-cost artist spaces, and I don't think there's been any wording added to support the protection of those things. I'm wondering if we're going to be able to use some of the tools such as the bonus densitying and densitying, that's not a word, bonus density in I3 subarea A, for instance. I'm thinking about a building that the city even owns, the Arts Factory. What's protecting that from us deciding to redevelop it? Because right now it's affordable artist studio space. I'm just using that as an example. 1000 Parker, of course, is there, as well as many other studios, including some from some very famous Vancouver artists in the area. So I'm concerned that the provisions put in place in this plan are very good at encouraging creation of creative spaces, but not very good at protecting existing ones. So can we use some of the tools in here to protect existing spaces?
I'm not sure if anyone wants to jump in. To start, I think one of the things that the district schedules do is really identify what a new form of development would look like, and as much as possible within these schedules, we've tried to encourage the introduction of new space with that inclusionary tool of allowing additional higher value spaces. The rezoning policy definitely around 1000 Parker, for example, there's language in there that would make the replacement or retention of those spaces a prerequisite to a rezoning in that area.
It talks about requiring replacement, but it doesn't give any, I didn't see anything for strengthening retention.
Right.
Because retention is always cheaper to the renter than replacement.
I don't know if you wanted to add in on that, Tom, or?
Evening, Councillor. Tom Wanklin, Senior Planner. The False Creek Flats plan itself, as a policy approved by Council, speaks very, very clearly as to the retention of all of the creative uses and land uses that exist in the flats, and alludes to the need to actually expand those.
Yep.
The district schedules are speaking to the
new development.
Yep. Well, the zoning to retain those, and also mechanisms to improve or increase those.
Okay, well, as we move forward with the plan,
yes.
I would love to see more language around, I was looking for the word retention and I had a very hard time finding
it. So the word retention you'll find in the actual Innovation Hub proposals within the plan,
yep.
Not so much a zoning statement. I also would like to take an opportunity to go back to Councillor Reimer's query and our Mayor's query, which I seem to sort of understand maybe related to the Emily Carr campus, Great Northern Way, because in the I3 proposed schedule, page 19, it speaks to retail store and it speaks to restaurants class 1 and 2, which would have the opportunity for music. So I'm not entirely certain as to the nature of your query. Certainly the Emily Carr campus, to my understanding, is a CD1. It's not included in these schedules or in any way have been affected by our proposals coming forward in the zoning. But the CD1, having read it just recently, I seem to recall there's allowance there for about 14,000 square meters of retail space in the CD1 in that campus. And the development of that retail facility and those amenities would be over to the Great Northern Way Trust, who would actually come forward with those development proposals.
Thank you.
Okay, you're good. Councillor DiGenova, questions?
I was watching the presentation from my office. My questions are specifically around the housing, both the market housing and the non-market housing. And I remember when this was referred to public hearing and some concerns that actually the False Creek Flats could be underbuilt. So I was hoping that you might be able to speak to sort of affordability in terms of what's being proposed for density, and the non-market housing units would be, are we talking about social housing? Are we talking about units at the hills limits? And what are we considering here in that? I mean, would we, possibly see a project come back that's outside of the parameters here in sort of viewing this moving forward and looking at the benefit. You know, we just in one breath heard from another item on the agenda here that looked at housing people of great needs. So if we're looking at building a whole community here, I'm just wondering if there's a possibility actually to possibly increase the density here for non-market and market housing units under our housing reset and affordability.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I guess I would start by saying many of the objectives around where and how we inserted housing into these district schedules is outlined through the flats plan. I think where we were, focusing on the economic role as the primary driver, and then looking where possible to introduce new opportunities for housing through these district schedules. Where we've added new opportunities for housing, it's predominantly been around either market rental or secured market rental or non-market housing opportunities. And so that's, and the approach again, recognizing that it's in a limited location. Definitely we look to intensify that use where possible without undermining the employment land base that adjacent, recognizing again as well there's a regional growth strategy which we've signed on as well. So that kind of as a framework as well for how we brought forward the policies. Did you want to add something, Tom?
I think I could also add that the plan is estimating that we estimate under full build-out achieving 4,600, in the region of 4,600 new housing units in the periphery of the flats, if one wants to call it that, because obviously the central part of the flats contains the employment areas, and also very interesting factors, the rail yards. Mm-hmm. And bringing housing against rail yards can be a very conflicting situation. So the flats plan is taking that into account.
Thank you. I see that under livability impacts. As for looking at the non-market housing, though, specifically, what type of mix are we looking at? Are we looking at the housing income limits as prescribed by BC Housing? Are we looking at sort of the core need of 375, it'll be 475, it could go higher. I'm just trying to understand who those units will be available to.
So that hasn't been determined apart from the fact that we will align with the policy and the definition of social housing in the allocation of units proportional to the affordability and the need. So that detail will come forward as projects apply to develop and bring that detail forward. So at the moment, there's provision for rental accommodation, affordable rental, as per the definition within the city policy, and also social housing having the range of shelter to hills to as defined.
Right. Another question just quickly on consultation. I understand that when this came to us earlier that there were a number of people, especially people who would be considered experts in the community, previous planners even, who were very concerned that this could be an underbuilt community and instead envision something more like the Olympic Village for this area. I'm just wondering if you could elaborate on the consultation with the many communities, the retail shop owners, industrial community, as well as the development community who came out to speak to us about this.
So we can certainly provide additional details on the consultation. These included, for example, having an advisory committee across the range of stakeholders that exist in and around the flats, including businesses, including institutions, including the artists, and including residents living in Strathcona, Citygate, Mount Pleasant. We had, trying to remember, at least 4 public engagement events and somewhere in the region of 6 to 8 workshops over the period of 2 years of the planning process. We also had online engagement opportunities with surveys and information sharing and interactive or active opportunities for people to share their ideas and views.
Thank you.
Okay, that is all the questions for time being from council. So we go to our speakers list. 4 people are registered to speak on item number 6. We'll call firstly Tom Edstrand, first speaker on this, followed by Dak Molnar. Good evening.
Evening. Thanks for your time. My name is Tom Edstrand. I'm one of the co-founders of Land Yachts. We manufacture skateboards and bicycles in the area. We're located at Williams and Glen, and we've been there for over 10 years. And not necessarily about the zoning, so I apologize if I'm straying here, but we're very concerned about the Williams option for the east-west arterial because we use the park very much, and I think it's going against the initiatives of the city with the Greenest City initiative, and I think it's contradicts the city's initiative, and I think it would cause irreversible damage. If this is not the time or place to discuss this, then I totally understand. But I wanted to be proactive and make sure that everybody understands that we will oppose this strongly. We don't think it's the best option. The SRA has proposed a 4th option, and I'm not sure whether you guys are considering it or not, but I think it should be considered, and I hope that you will. I feel that our company is in line with the mission of the city for the Greenest Initiative, and I think in all likelihood, if the Williams proposal went ahead, we would be displaced, and it would be a detriment to the area. So I just wanted to speak to that. So again, I apologize if this is not the time or place to discuss the east-west arterial, but I wanted to bring that to your attention.
Okay, appreciate your feedback here. And that's something we can follow up with staff on. Thanks for being here. And speaker number 2, Dak Molnar, followed by Ann McMullen.
Mayor and council, thank you. I'm a rental developer in Western Canada, mostly in British Columbia. Just as a note to council, I do not have any interest in the False Creek Flats, but I'm here simply to speak as a rental developer, and more specifically within this False Creek Flats proposal, the amenity charge, or CAC, that is being suggested for rental housing. First of all, I agree with some of the councillors' earlier comments that this plan is way less dense than it should be from a housing perspective. In my opinion, there could be much more housing, and similar to Olympic Village, and integrating all of the uses from light industrial, manufacturing, even the guy with the skateboard company. Basically, I belong to a group of rental developers in town who are trying our best to beat back this rental crisis. And we believe as a group that imposing any amenity charges on rental housing is nonsense. In this case, you're talking about $120 a square foot fee for rental housing. So if I'm building 1,000 square foot family-based units to live around jobs and transit, that adds approximately $120,000 to the cost of that unit, which when drawn out over a 10-15-year period on return on cost, that equates to roughly 75 cents a foot. So that unit would be, that cost would be passed directly to the consumer. That's roughly $700 a month for that unit. CACs, or amenity cost charges, or however they're described, were invented for condominiums. And although I don't want to go into the long topic of whether or not they should be applied, there are many sites in this city, including in Cole Harbour, where units are selling for $2,500 a foot, where the CACs are $60 a foot, not $120. Applying a amenity charge on rental housing in any plan that this city moves forward is ridiculous given the crisis we're facing. We want downward pressure on rents, which means incentives, not deterrents. I currently develop in the Capital District, and in one area, I built 250 rental units in the last 3 years. And this jurisdiction gives me 10-year property tax breaks and free density bonuses for pure rental housing. That is the way the city needs to go. Some of the COCs on the Cambie corridor, which are now producing 1,400 a foot townhouses, are lower than $120, which staff are suggesting should be imposed here. With rising interest rates, cap rates are rising too. The two movements in the federal prime rate in the last couple of months have put upward pressure on bonds, and cap rates for this type of product are rising, not falling. And the Coriolis report, which I've had the benefit of reading, has cap rates that are unfortunately 50 to 100 basis points behind what the market will be when False Creek Flats becomes a reality. The margins in these projects are already thin, and the process to get them done is extraordinarily long. Adding any CAC to rental housing, False Creeks or otherwise, is a bad idea, and I think that council and mayor should not support it. Thank you.
Thank you. You have questions from Councillor DiGenova. Mr. Molnar.
I just had a question. You were talking about your experience and that you don't have an interest specifically in the False Creek Flats, but in your experience in building rental and looking at the city policies that obviously have encouraged you in the past to build rental, would you think that perhaps this would discourage people from putting their hands up to build rental?
Absolutely.
Okay. So this would actually perhaps go against what we're looking at in the housing reset to provide affordable rental options.
Yes, and I know why staff did it, because they think that there will be no rezoning process, so you'll automatically get it, but that doesn't mean that the cost won't be there. This charge just replaces that time that it takes to go through a rezoning, and it's simply you end up at the same spot that you are now.
And it's always been my view, and I've asked this question many times, but when we put up charges like rezoning fees, that gets passed on to the market. That's what I think. But 100%. I'm just wondering, do you have any comments on that? Do you think?
I don't want to be here all night, so you guys are going to have a late night. So yeah, I have lots of comment on it. I'd be more than happy to talk to you in person about it. But yes, there are flaws in the system when it comes to rental housing, especially. And CAC shouldn't be, they should be fast-tracked. It shouldn't be treated as an amenity. It shouldn't be looked at staff the same as a condo is. They're treated like the same process. So, and we need rental housing. We don't need more $1 million condos.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Councillor Carr, you have questions?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much, Mr. Muller, for coming. I really appreciate that, that you are here. You said something that spurred my interest when you said that the costs, the amount of money that I guess would go into a community amenity contribution or is basically the same in terms of value as the public hearing process. There's a cost involved in the public hearing cost.
Of course.
Right. So without a public hearing process, and instead a CAC charge, wouldn't the cost be the same? Wouldn't there be no added cost? Because you'd be reducing the cost of going through a public hearing process.
No, the cost of the public hearing process, it's a moving target, but adding cost to rental housing, as I said before, in an area like this, which is so underdensified and has so much access to transit jobs. I mean, you can walk to the center business district in 20 minutes from here. This is an area where people can bike, walk, or take 2 stops to get into the inner city, and they can access transit to go anywhere in the Lower Mainland. So incentivizing rental housing is my purpose, and I want the city to incentivize it and not think that every time a developer shows up, you have to charge them per square foot to build a building. It's the only place in Canada that does that, really. From a CAC point of view, there's DCCs and everybody pays sewer charges and stuff, but in a lot of jurisdictions in this province and in this country, rental housing is endorsed by staff.
Yeah, I've heard situations though in Toronto, for example, where same developers that are in Vancouver build in Toronto, and but they don't get the subsidies that we have provided in the past through Rental 100, for example, where we waive DCLs or CSCs. So So if they can build them in Toronto, why can't they build them here?
Well, because the process in Toronto is different. The OMB in Toronto has dictated the pace of their development, right? The Ontario Municipal Development Board, which basically gives developers a chance to go around this whole process and move into the OMB, and the OMB has been fast-tracking and rubber stamping massive density for all asset classes: social, affordable, rental, and condo. I spend about 30 days a year in Toronto, and I've watched it grow over the last 10 years, and they're lapping us in all sectors of development.
Mm. But it sounds to me like just correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds to me like shortening the process is a desirable thing.
Yes, it is, but shorten the process and not charge us for it.
Well, then you win and you win.
We're not winning right now, I assure you. It's a fight every step of the way, and I wish it wasn't. 'Cause I like doing business in the town I was born in. I've been doing business for almost 20 years outside of Vancouver, and the first time I've come to Vancouver to do business again is with my 2 sites that I have going right now, and it's proving to be a much bigger task than I thought after building 2,000 plus rental units in different jurisdictions over the last 10 years.
Again, thanks for coming.
Welcome.
Councillor Affleck, you have questions.
Yeah, no escape there. Appreciate you.
At home too.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming, and I appreciate your point of view, because we don't get this point of view very often in council. You talked a bit about the margins and the interest rates and the impact of that. And I guess I'm just trying to understand the difference between doing a condo development and a rental building. Correct me if I'm wrong. So if you do a condo development, your return on investment is pretty quick. You may get 20% on your margins. You might get, you walk away with a nice little profit of 20%, which is like most businesses. That's kind of an average number for most businesses. In a rental development, though, you're looking at a long-term, in general, and there's been a lot of interest in rental over the last several years with interest rates at 0% or 1.5. So they're looking at a long-term return of, 1, 2, 3% on average per year. The people investing are happy with that. So let me get it straight. So you're worried that, so there's the whole issue of the CACs, but as an investment for a developer, if you're looking at the 50 to 60 year investment and the return on that investment, like nice little cash cow, isn't that something we should look at? When we're making decisions and what value we put on it as a city and what we should expect back from you, understanding your return over that 60 years as opposed to over 3 years. I mean, I'm trying to find out where you're coming from on. So
basically, you're building to bank rates. Okay, like a good person can go and invest money in an investment fund and make 4 or 5% on their money annually, and not have anybody get involved in it from an amenity charge thing. So we're building these at very low rates, and as cap rates and interest rates rise, the margins are thinning. So we won't build them anymore. Like, I can't work for 2%. Doesn't work. So there is very little money in these things anyways. And the point about that I made essentially is that the extraction of the $120 fee, the proposal of that extraction in this is based on the Coriolis report, which has cap rates that are much lower than I think the market will be providing, as they have been as low as they ever have been in the history of Canada. So as those things go up, the margins will be thinned, and that $120 will be the profit.
Right. And then you also mentioned a number, I think it was $700. Was that the cost, or what was you said $700?
That's essentially the passed on cost of a $120 per foot CAC over a period of time. It adds about $600 or $700 to the
per unit. Yeah. To the cost. So you have to then rent it for.
Yeah, like a unit that I would rent for $2,500, I'm now renting for $3,200. Right. 1,000 square foot unit.
Okay. Thanks very much.
That is all your questions. Thanks, Mr. Molnar, for being here. And our next speaker is Anne McMullen, followed by last registered speaker on item 6, George Rommel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors. My name is Anne McMullen, and I represent the Urban Development Institute, companies like Zach Molnar is member of UDI. A few positive comments. I think that, over the last number of months, UDI has been working with the city at all levels of government on strategies to improve housing affordability in Vancouver and throughout our region. Under the leadership of Council, Sadhu Johnson, Kathleen Lewin-Thomas, Kay Krishna, Gil Kelly, the city is increasing the supply of housing through new area plans and taking steps to improve processing times. We're also very optimistic with the prospects under the housing reset. UDI and our members are participating in a lot of dialogue on a number of important files. And we look forward to continuing to work with the city to address these critical issues impacting housing affordability. And to that end, we wrote to you back in May outlining some of our concerns with the Falls Creek Flats plan. The Falls Creek Flats is a large 450-acre area, of course, as you know, adjacent to the downtown peninsula that is well served by transit, including the proposed first stop on the new Broadway line. The Flats, as some of our speakers have said, has the potential to be much more than just an employment destination. There is an opportunity to build a self-contained, vibrant community that will create a strong sense of place where people can live, work, and play. As you may recall, the industry had 4 key recommendations to increase the vibrancy and attractiveness of the Flats, increase the residential component, include more ground-level retail and services, provide more flexible general office uses to meet the needs of dynamic changing businesses, and increase the proposed heights and densities. We also recommended more rental housing to the plan to help address Vancouver's persistent affordability challenges and the less than 1% vacancy rate. So I'm back here again tonight before you to discuss this very serious issue that Dak addressed, that we do believe that could absolutely undermine the city's objective to increase rental housing in Falls Creek Flats and across Vancouver. As Dak mentioned, you're proposing $120 per square foot charge on rental housing. And in the report before you, which is very concerning to our members, especially when we are in this rental housing crisis. This is a serious threat to our industry's ability to create rental housing. I truly believe we need to be working together to encourage as many rental housing units as we can, build to increase the supply of those units. In this type of environment, UDI is concerned about any unnecessary tax or amenity contribution being applied to new rental units because they would act as a disincentive to supply. New rental units should be considered an amenity. Dak talked about a lot of the numbers, proposing the new tax on rental units and how much that would cost. The city has argued that residents, including renters, will demand amenities in the neighborhoods. However, it appears that much of the amenity share contributions that are being earmarked are to support economic enabling activities serving the Falls Creek Flats. It would be a stretch to argue that these investments will improve the livability of the area for the local residents. The use of a land lift analysis is also problematic. UDI and the city have been encouraging the federal government to provide tax incentives for rental housing units. Why would the federal government agree to this if the city is going to scoop most of the financial benefits? I'll not go into the technical details of the assumptions of the Coriolis report. However, in our opinion, there's enough of a concern about the analysis and the assumptions to give the city pause on proceeding with these high rates. In addition, we'll add one general comment regarding the key Coriolis assumption that the high attractiveness of the Falls Creek Flats location. Given that the Flats is in a primarily industrial area with active rail and industry, under the plan it lacks the housing and entertainment elements we would have liked to see to make the area more vibrant. We doubt the Flats will be an attractive choice to live as the assumptions contained in the report. So, as I've said, none of us want to see rental projects being shelved, nor do we want to see developers of these projects moving their rental investments outside the city of Vancouver. We're concerned about the ongoing precedent of any amenity charges being applied to new rental projects. At the very least, if the city does not proceed with the charge, it should not be anywhere near the proposed amount. In conclusion, if council is not prepared to reduce the rates at this time, we would recommend that the bylaw be approved. However, we do ask that council direct staff to reassess the financial analysis. This would give more time for consultation and a reasonable dialogue. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and I'm open to your questions.
Thank you. And you have questions from Councillor DiGenova.
Thank you very much. So in looking at how much that would cost per unit, the added cost, $120 a square foot. If we're looking at like 600 square feet, we're looking at $72,000 in added cost per unit.
Right. I mean, we did sort of the math around 60,000, but yes, if you did it at that cost, right? Yeah, depending on the size, yeah.
Well, let's give somebody a workstation too.
Right.
So 600 square feet, but 500 square feet, whatever that would be, that's a huge increase, and that would be passed on to the market.
Exactly. And, you know, I think the council and staff have been working very, very hard to get rental built. And, you know, in the last number of years, the the economics just haven't been there. And now we're finally in an opportunity, in a window of economic opportunity that is probably very short-lived as we're looking at high interest rates. And yet, you know, we're almost going to be starting to put the brakes on. You know, let the industry build the rental in an environment where it's actually viable. It hasn't been viable. And so, I mean, I know to Councillor Carr's point, you know, you're not win-winning. We're finally in an opportunity where we can build rental and make it affordable. But then you start adding on costs, it makes it almost impossible.
Is it fair to say, and again, you don't have to answer any of my questions, but that you would think that some of your members that were more encouraged to build rental would actually, under this new policy, and especially in the False Creek Flats, instead look elsewhere for other opportunities?
Be discouraged, absolutely, yes. I mean, I think as Dak Molnar said, that they haven't been building rental in the city of Vancouver, and here's an opportunity, and then it's almost, you know, it's taken out from under you. And, you know, I think we all get passionate about issues, but, you know, rental is that opportunity to provide housing for, whether it's, you know, for jobs, for the kind of people that we want to keep in Vancouver. And I think to come up with policies that look really at disincentivizing it, you know, it's very frustrating.
And we just recently saw community amenity contributions and DCL sort of charged on other things that we haven't normally charged them on, like office, right?
Right.
So
and we didn't get into that tonight. But
no,
yes.
And we're not here to get into that. It's just in looking at the correlation as to who's stepping up to the plate to say, I'd still like to build this regarding that. So thank you for answering that question. Another question that I have is regarding sort of the plan overall. I remember that a number of people had come to speak to us. It touches on the point, and my question to Mr. Kelly before regarding, is this a missed opportunity for, you know, I know density can be a dirty word here in the city. The developers often shoulder the burden of that, and I'm just wondering, in a neighborhood or community like this, or that it will be, do you think that this is underbuilt, as Mr.
Yes, of course. I mean, we've got a supply problem, we've got a rental supply problem. So yes, I believe it's underbuilt. And I think there was concern that, you know, if it's residential, then, you know, the land value goes up and it pushes out the commercial. But I think if you're, you know, pre-zoning it as rental, that has an opportunity, you know, that you're not, there's not the speculation, then you can keep the land prices within a reasonable amount. So yes, of course, I think it's a miss. That's why I was referencing some earlier comments that we were here a couple of months ago or whenever it was, to say that this is a missed opportunity, and then there is opportunity for more rental. I mean, you know, I think we have to look at however many rental units it is. Was it 4,500 or something? That'll still take a number of years to be built, and you know, the demand is only going to get higher. And so we have to remember that we're, you know, we say we're addressing this today by approving it. It's still 2 or 3 years probably before people start to move in.
Well, I haven't made my mind up until I've heard from speakers, and we have to sit or debate. So we may approve it, we may not approve it.
Thank you.
Consultation is my next question, and I think you led up to that. Since you were here in May, and, you know, I feel that our staff do an excellent job of consultation. It's always unfortunate when there are people who feel that they haven't been contacted, but I know that yourself, we received letters from former planners who used to work here at the City of Vancouver regarding this issue. They were very passionate about the False Creek Flats. Specifically, do you feel that there's been robust consultation since May and before this and as this comes before us, or do you feel that there are a number of people in your industry and community who haven't been heard?
Well, I think that we have had the dialogue, but I don't think that, you know, there has been any, obviously there hasn't been any agreement, there hasn't been any change in the city's approach or what they believe is sort of, quote, the number. So I suppose we've had meetings, but we haven't made any headway.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Affleck, questions?
Just on to something Councillor Genova touched on. What if you went higher? Like, would it make it more? Would the margins be better? What if you went, you know, instead of 18, whatever floors? Change anything in the math?
Well, yes, I suppose, but you know, I don't want to be negotiating on the floor of what the numbers are. But you know, I think that is in your own report, you know, from May. It talks that it specifically states that, you know, for-profit affordable rental housing is part of the amenity. So, you know, I think it's in many of your the council's report. So, like I said, I don't want to talk about the debate, or like I said, negotiate with more density or what's the number right here. But I think that the most important point is, like I said, in your own reports, is rental is considered an amenity. So, when we're just in this window where there is some profit to be made in rental, it's like, well, no, we're going to pull that back. And so I think that's the main issue that we have is what does this do to the ability to build rental? And I suppose in my last point is, if you approve the bylaw, then at least there's a commitment perhaps, or a direction to staff that we go back and work on it so that maybe we can have those discussions about is it more height, is it more density and that sort of thing. But I don't even know if that's even on the table. So.
But I think your reference to rental being an amenity is related to when we do a strata development and we extract a CAC and we take cash or we take a building.
Right.
I just want to get us back to the district schedules and
I think this is
what's before council right now.
Well, this is a big part of this
a little
report,
far
Mr.
away
Mayor.
from that.
I think that there is a significant portion of the that is related to a rental, and I think that's something we have to make a decision on tonight, and I don't think being irrelevant to that. But anyways, my concern is what you're saying is that potentially with the land sit fallow, it won't be used, it won't be, a developer won't be interested based on the current structure that we're creating here, that they'll be, you know what, I'm not going to build there, I'm not going to do this, or ever. Is that the concern that this won't happen?
Yes, that's the concern. That's the concern.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Carr.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much for coming, Ms. McMullen. I really appreciate always your attendance at our meetings here. My first question, you said something around pre-zoning as rental. Do you think that's a smart move, pre-zone?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. When we increase density, there's a consequential increase in land value, isn't there not? Is there not?
Yes.
Okay.
It depends. In the city of Vancouver, but in general, in some areas, it's in some parts of the region, not necessarily, but
here in this city?
Yes, in the city, yes.
And that's been a big concern of ours in terms of speculative land value increases, people anticipating that we will. But anyway, just
sure.
Aside, there's a correlation there. So do you think that there is a fair share of the because that land value will stay with the property owner, right?
Right.
That is there when the city up zones for density, is there maybe not an obligation to think about the public getting some share of that increased land value?
Well, I think it's in a condo development we've said that, been on record over and over again, that we believe that in a condo development that the industry pays its fair share towards the impact of development. In a rental, I do believe it's very different. I think that the rental is part of that contribution, and a condo development is very different in how you sort of reap the rewards or the financial benefit. Sure, there's a land lift, but that's, that means that you're going to sell it right away. So, in a rental, you're not going to reap the rewards of the land lift if you're renting it and you're owning it for 30 years. You're building it, whether rent, like I said, you've got good interest rates right now. What's going to happen to interest rates over time? So when we're looking at these numbers, and we're looking at it over time, it's not on a transactional or what we call a merchant condo development where the land lift is, yes, you sell it and you take the money and you and move on to the next project. So in that case, yes, of course, we believe that that you pay your fair share towards the impact. But in rental, I think it's apples and oranges, to use a cliche. I don't think you can use the same process and formula for condo market CACs for the density bonusing for rental. I think that's what it is. I don't think all those considerations, in our opinion, are taken into consideration.
In other jurisdictions, you and your members are involved in more than just Vancouver, neighboring jurisdictions, or even of jurisdictions outside of even the Greater Vancouver area. Are there any other municipalities that charge a community amenity or a development levy on the building of rental?
Not that I know of.
Okay, I'll ask that question of staff. I am
Yeah.
interested in that.
I mean, there, I think part of it, there was just a project disapproved in the city of North Van, but it was a combination of condo and rental. So there was a community amenity contribution, but that's a combination. So in most municipalities, they incentivize it.
Just one last question. Do you think that a combination of condo and rental, whether it's perhaps, I mean, we've got an inclusionary zoning bylaw that talks about inclusionary 20% social housing. Have you thought about, do you have an opinion on inclusionary zoning for rental?
In the Falls Creek Flats or in general?
Well, we are talking zoning right now, but yeah.
Yes, I mean, I'm not, I don't know if that's an opportunity in this case, but I mean, yes, I think that we're supportive of that. I mean, we do it all over the Lower Mainland where you've got a combination. So, like I said, with just a project recently in North Van, in other areas. So yes, it's possible, absolutely.
Okay, appreciate your comments. Thank you.
And Councillor Louis, questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just on the concept of a community amenity contribution, you agree that there's some benefit from it to provide, of the program to provide some amenities to the local community in this case?
In a market condo, yes, sure.
And so just the concept of CACs, it's meant to collect theoretically a portion of the land lift,
right,
provide some amenity to the local community.
Well, that's right. It's set out as in the, what do you call it, either offset the impact or that's.
In this case, you're saying that rental as a whole is enough of a benefit rather than taking, in this case, $120 worth of CAC contribution. Rental as alone should be enough rather than receiving the monies and then investing it into the community.
Well, it's not, yes, but it's
investing into silencing that phone.
It's distracting. I couldn't really hear you. So sorry, your question is well, yes, I mean, rental is an amenity, but not only that, it's also the financial aspect of adding cost to the rental. So it's twofold. And I think we do have concerns about, in whether, in the guidelines, sort of provincial guidelines around density bonusing, it is supposed to offset the impact of development, to put the money back into what we would call kind of employment space. That, that's not, frankly, within the spirit of density bonusing programs. They're supposed to go to offset the impact of development. And I don't think that there is a negative impact of rental in the Falls Creek Flats. I think it's a positive.
Well, I guess you could argue longer conversation because the impacts are theoretically related to the person and the activities, not specific to location only. But just to your point, though, if it's not that we collect a CAC and we accept rental as the benefit, and because it's adding to cost to rental, you say, what do you think the impact to rents will be as a result? If we were to not implement this $120, would the rents be down?
I think that it will mean that
$120?
Sorry, I think that it means that rental will get built if we don't have this additional cost.
But what I heard earlier from Councillor DeGenova was that there is a direct cost to the end user, and you kind of agreed with that there's an impact to the end user. So I'm trying to figure out how much an impact you think the UDI thinks that reduction or elimination of $120 a square foot would be.
Well, I think that, I think she was asking generally, do costs get passed on to the consumer? And I think they either get passed on to the consumer or the project doesn't get built. And in this case, I think there's a fear and a real concern that many projects won't go ahead. Some may, but that is our biggest concern about what impact it will have on the building of rental. Or if it's built, and those that are able to build, there will be a limited supply, and so with a limited supply, then you are able to pass on the additional costs if you're able to build because of the limited supply and the demand. So you can demand more rent. So it's these things. There's always unintended consequences.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Louis. Councillor Reimer, did you have more questions?
I think they're probably for staff. I mean, there's a larger policy question here, but I guess specifically on this area, so we're talking False Creek Flats, very limited rental. I know we could have a larger policy discussion about whether that was the right policy or not, but that discussion was had in May. So knowing that there's a very limited amount of rental there, it's supposed to be targeted towards students. It's hard for me to see where there's any land lift in student-oriented rental housing, generally speaking.
Right.
Okay, so I'm not misreading this, like there's not a huge profit to be made in student-oriented.
Well, that's what I've said out in my comments, that given the area where it is, the kind of amenities, the kind of target market of rental that we're trying to build, that's, yeah, I mean, I think that it's,
Yeah, okay. So if, I know the UDIs, this is sort of the awkward question, you've long advocated for these kind of flat or fixed costs.
Well, that was said to me in a meeting, and we have advocated for fixed CAC's density bonus, a density program, but for the condo market, we have always said that we firmly believe that in order to get rental built in a very tight market and in the financial situation, that it's not for rental. So yes, we are supportive of a density bonus program that is based on land lift for the condo market, as other municipalities do, but not for rental. That I do, it's given, I've said it enough times, but we do not support it in this area or frankly in any areas for rental, given the difficulty to get rental built. I mean, we haven't been building much rental in this city, not because there's, if it was easy, we'd be doing it.
There are more policy questions I'd like to ask you, but they're not so material to this decision tonight. So perhaps we can find another time to have them once this.
You mean policy about in general or about this? You mean?
Policy in general.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I would welcome that opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's all of your questions. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you.
Ms. McMullen. And our fourth and final registered speaker on this item is George Rommel. Good evening.
Mr. Mayor and Council, I think I'm still alive because I ride a bike from the P&E area to the False Creek Flats where my studio is every day. And it's safe and I'm very pleased. It's a wonderful green city. You've said no to Kinder Morgan. It's all great. But as an artist, I really think the city needs to work hard to retain and develop studios. I think it's an investment that will be returned in the long run. I think of all the students I've had, all the talented, resourceful students, and how many of them were like Emily Carr. When you think of how she could barely afford the materials to produce her work, and yet look at the tourism, look at the people that come to Vancouver now from all over the world to see her work. It's incredible. But for every famous artist, there are still many that are struggling. I have a studio just southeast of Main and Terminal, beside the homeless shelter. They're great neighbors, by the way. I'm beside Bernie's welding and engineering shop. And we have a collective of furniture makers and artists. And like the artists at 1000 Parker, we really feel endangered. I was a Haida slave. Okay, I worked for Bill Reid for a decade on the Spirit of Haida Gwaii for the airport, Mythic Messengers, the Raven and the First Men. And, Bill is another artist that could not sell his work for more than the materials in it. And he became a national treasure. People come to the Museum of Anthropology. So, the money that the UBC and local and federal governments put towards his work have come back in quantum to our communities. But, what if the False Creek Flats are gentrified, or I'm going to use the word Granville Islandized, to the point where we can't work there anymore? Councillor Reamer made an interesting point about respect for minority rights in a democracy. Well, artists and small industry are a minority. We're facing big money and big development. But I really believe the long-term cultural benefits are hugely worthwhile for generations down the road. I want to get on with my life, the rest of my life, making art that's about here I don't want to pull the plug on Vancouver. My work is about here. But I see so many people that can barely afford to keep going here. If we have to pay more in studio rent, we can't stay. And I think that would be a real loss.
All right, thanks. You have questions from Councillor Carr. Mr. Rommel, you have a question here.
Thanks, Mr. Rommel, for coming. Are there particular parts of what's in front of us now in terms of zoning implementation that you think particularly put in danger the artist studios, things that you would want to see changed in these recommendations?
That term I use, Granville Islandized, it's scary because I know what goes in. I know the costs are incredible. I understand that. But if we're not all famous artists, I mean, there's a lot of famous artists from this area. We have Liz McGore and Jeffrey Farmer, and there's a lot of really, well-to-do artists now, well-established artists. But we're not all in that league. But that doesn't mean our work doesn't have cultural value. But we can't afford to pay more studio rent than we're paying already. But we want to be here.
Right. Okay. So you're just looking for a
financially workable space with light and space. That's right. That's all we're asking for. Light and space in Vancouver to keep going.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor DiGenova, do you have a question? One more question for you.
Hi, over here. You were talking about your space and looking at the artists specifically. We were having a conversation also about housing, and you don't have to answer this question, but do you have any thoughts on that? Often with industrial, we don't see housing in industrial areas.
My best neighbors right next to our studio are the homeless shelter people. They're amazing. When I need help moving something, I dig out a few coins and they're in there helping. They all want to be assistants. We can coexist.
So beyond the shelter space, looking at sort of housing, and if there was an opportunity to create more affordable housing by putting more housing on the site, is that something
I think a lot of planning would have to go into that, because you have to deal with issues around noise and dust and the kind of things that artists do. Like, these so-called artist lofts around the studio, around the city, have been, well, they're great for designers, but we also need industrial spaces.
I understand.
Where you can do real work. Not that there aren't all kinds of real methods of working, but you know what I mean. There has to be industrial spaces as well.
So you'd like to see buildings where one of the amenity contributions would be like a shared art studio, where you could do bigger artworks than you could per se do in your individual loft or studio.
Absolutely. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, that is all your questions. Thanks, Mr. Rommel. And that's it for registered speakers. Do we have any more speakers for item number 6? Yes, okay. Sure, yeah. If you could just give us your name for the public record.
Can you hear me? Am I on the mic?
Yes.
Okay, my name's Grace McKenzie. So I just only came here to ask you to just add to your Appendix F, page 1. It's the change to the micro-dwelling policies and guidelines. It must be a typo, because they just forgot to add in sub-area A after IC3. So that's all I came here for. So that's for the clerk. But then after listening to all the talk, no, I had to say something. So I'll just get my notes here after. So I have industrial land. In 2002, my land was worth $350,000. In 2017, my land is worth $4 million. $4 million means more taxes, more property taxes. So every time the city upzones, my land values go up. So I would suggest you don't upzone anymore because it keeps adding more value to the land, which the developers have to pay for the land, so everything goes up in price. So that's something that was bothering me. And then other people were saying that there's such a need for rental. Well, there's been an apartment building built at 14th and Fraser. It was built 6 months ago. It's still sitting there 3/4 empty. There's also one up at Kingsway at approximately Dumfries. It's sitting there mostly empty. I don't know what the percentage is on that one. So also the flats. Now my dad used to work for the city for 37 years. In the flats, to increase the flats land, the city of Vancouver dumped garbage into the flats. They dumped paint, oil from the yards, they dumped pesticides and herbicides, they dumped rubble that includes asbestos, and to my knowledge that flats has never been decontaminated. So the flats are contaminated. The next thing is if you're suggesting strictly ordinary rental in those lands, the land's polluted. Also, you're mixing industrial and manufacturing land uses with residential land. That's not fair to the people who are going to be living there. The kinds of things that are allowed in that area are heavy-duty stuff that's noisy, like machine and equipment manufacturing, metal production manufacturing. I just went through your district schedules to see what's allowed in IC in industrial and manufacturing zones. And then people were talking about public consultation. Well, I've owned that, our family has owned that property. Boy, this makes me mad. Just give me a second, because I'm not feeling well either. Just give me a minute. We didn't get any notice from the city telling us that they were changing our district. Gee, why? That's really annoying. I mean, we've been there for 75 years. You'd think you'd know we're there. Okay. So then we also have another place elsewhere in the city, and your fellow, Mr. Kelly, was saying that, oh yes, well, we give the open houses over to the developers, and they, thank you very much, then they get a hold of the citizens, and then they have their open houses. Well, I happen to belong to a community group over the other side of the city there, and our community group sent a notice to the development that was going on there and said, yes, thank you, we'd be very interested in coming. They said, no, we haven't got any space for you. And here's the email that they sent to our community group if you want to look at it. So, you know, it might be a good idea that the city thinks that that's what's happening, but in reality, people aren't getting told that things are happening. That's not right. Sorry, that really bothers me. It really does. So I guess that's it. So if you wouldn't mind, I would really greatly appreciate it if somebody would put forward and ask their staff to just add that little thing into your dwelling, you know, where they made a typo. So I don't, maybe I'll ask Ms. Carr, because you're always so kind. If you just ask staff to add that in brackets thing to the micro dwelling policies and guidelines. It says sub-area A. Okay, so that's all I have to say. But boy, I'm telling you, you shouldn't be putting residential on that dirty land in the flats until you clean it up. You shouldn't be putting residential in, mixing it with industrial and manufacturing uses. It's not right. You shouldn't keep telling citizens who own property that your taxes are just going to keep going up and up and up and up, because that's what happens when you upzone. It's totally the city's fault for increasing the value of things, of units and apartments and everything else in the city, because you keep upzoning. You think when you upzone that developers aren't going to pay more for the land that's already there and then pass it on to the renters and pass it on to everybody else? Stop upzoning. Deal with what you've got in the city right now and put proper uses mixed with proper uses.
Okay, that's...
God, thank you very much. I get so
You have a question
mad
from
at you.
Councillor
Oh.
Carr?
you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for coming. And it's okay to get mad.
Well, yeah, well, I'm not feeling well, you see. I'm going through treatment for something very serious, and I'm not happy
Anyway,
with
well, thank you for coming. That's great. My question is, you said that you didn't get notice.
No.
So do you mind giving your address so that I can ask staff about why that address didn't get?
I will give you my address in private. I will email you, because I don't want the whole city to know where I live.
Right. Or, yeah, okay. That's fine. That would be good.
Okay?
Thank you.
I better write that down or I might forget it, okay? Just give me a second to write that down. No, you can't mix things. It's not right. Email.
More questions, Councillor Carr?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thanks a lot. I know you don't care what I say, but at least I said my say.
No, we care. That's why we're sitting here.
Thanks a lot.
So thank you for coming. And are there any other speakers? Please.
Appendix F, page 1.
Okay, step right up. Yes, please.
Oh my God, okay. Hi, I came to talk about something else, but a different issue. But anyways, I am a potter and I teach pottery, and I'm also a teacher. But anyways, my income is between 30 and 50,000 before deductions. So when you're talking about rental housing, and the person before talked about renting at 2,500 plus, I don't make that much a month. I know a lot of potters who don't make that much a month. When the Olympics came in, I actually came and talked to the council about what was happening when they brought in North Falls Creek. They were demolishing all the warehouses, and the silent occupants were the artists and probably people who didn't have a place to live. And those spaces never got rebuilt. They never formed part of a mandate of the city to, just like you say, you want to have trees and parks and stuff like that, to protect artist spaces. And artists are many different kinds, and they don't require the city artist spaces that were built up recently. I'm not sure where, somewhere in the place we're talking about. I was pretty excited. I thought, cool, maybe I could rent a place there at $3,000 a month kind of thing. So it was very, very overbuilt. A potter needs a cement slab and a lot of power and tall ceilings, so that when you're, if you have your kiln inside, you're not over-fuming yourself, and a sink with a clay trap. That's all you need. You don't need all this fancy overbuilt stuff, and the problem is it raises the cost. Now you have 1,000 Parker. That's all you have. You have the Murgatroyd building, and you have some other buildings that are being leased for 15 to 20 years by a secondary group of people. So you have to pay the building owner, you have to pay those people, and so it is increasing the rents. And some of the places on Hastings Street, maybe during the culture crawl that's coming up, you might want to go check them out. I went to check out a studio there that was going to be $250 a month. By the time I got into the studio, I felt like I was covered in a veneer of, what's it called? Reduced urine, okay? Because the alleyway was so stinky. Then I get into the building, and I have very sensitive lungs and stuff like this, and the kiln's running, it's pretty stinky, and then I have to walk up the stairs and out the building, and I go to the top floor, and there's buckets everywhere because the roof is leaking water. So the ceiling is like got big holes. There's all kinds of stuff coming out. There's mildew. So I wanted to go to the hospital and have myself resuscitated. Instead, when I got home, I made sure I peeled all my clothes off before I got into the house because I wasn't sure if I'd picked up a lot of germs. Those are the kind of studio spaces that are available for someone like me. I work full time, and I can't afford, and I haven't been able to for a long time, afford the rentals in Vancouver. So, and I'm also concerned about the artist spaces. It's not reasonable to think that someone would be living in Langley and having a studio in Chilliwack or all manners of combinations. So I'm concerned. I agree with what you said. Retain the buildings, make them safe, but don't go overboard. And they don't have to be pretty. Make them functional, which is a totally different can of worms than other buildings you're talking about. And then if you're going to bring in housing, the woman before, she was talking about the land. I was wondering about that, the toxicity levels. But also look at the community that's living there. Quit displacing people. It's not fair. And the other thing is there's a very nice tall building at the corner of Terminal and Main, and it's really nice looking, and it would be lovely if it was kept and just added to. You know, we need to start respecting our culture and our history in the form of the buildings, and then just add to them, but not in such a way that the building that flows upwards is some kind of modern monstrosity that has no relationship to the building that it comes out of.
So you're over your 5 minutes, so
Oh,
we have
okay.
to call it there.
Just one last thing.
Could you, actually, you're over 5 and we've got dozens of speakers who are waiting, and
Okay.
5 is our limit. So could you just give us your name for the public record, please?
Rochelle Davidson.
Thank you. And you were speaking to a later item too as well.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much for stepping up to speak and share your feedback. Are there any more speakers for item number 6? Last call speakers for item number 6. Okay, seeing none, we will close the speakers list. And as we've had, Madam Clerk, have we had little or no correspondence since 4 p.m.? We close public comments. It has been circulated. Okay. So we can close public comments and go to any closing comments from staff.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, Gil Kelly, General Manager, Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability. I just want to say a couple of points really briefly and then ask Tom Wanklin to touch on a couple of points or several points that came up during the speakers. We're, of course, here to answer any questions that you might have. I would just remind you and caution you that a lot of the testimony you heard about and many of your questions were directed at this notion about the cost of the amenity share for bonus density. I just wanted to say that recall that is in a very, very small area of the flats plan, and it's targeted for a particular use, that share, which is really to help with many of the things which some of the artists and other industrial users spoke about, which is helping to subsidize art space and others going forward. But I think beyond that, what you were hearing from a number of the speakers is the first foray into a much larger discussion, which is really belongs in a more citywide context in the housing strategy, which is, should rental housing pay at all for community amenities of some kind or increased affordability within the projects? And I would just caution you, I think that we're not going to be able to settle that question in the context of the flats tonight in this very discrete argument. I would offer that in this particular case, we did study the question carefully, and we have Jay Wallenberg here from Corios Consulting who helped us set that rate. And I think the corollary question which came up this evening is whether or not construction costs and things like amenity charges actually set the rental prices or whether those are set by the market. And he did a study for planning not very long ago on that very question, related in that case primarily to strata, but I think the same principles apply. So with your indulgence after Tom, I think it's important for you to hear that piece of the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mayor and Council. I think going back to the original points raised by Gil at the time we brought the flats plan to you, he emphasized that the flats is about where people work, not about where people live. And we are very mindful of the need to balance between those who need places to live, affordable places, but also those who need affordable places to work and to create. And we've heard tonight some very insightful and emotional deliveries on the vulnerability and the sensitivity of those spaces and how we should try and increase them, how we should try and retain them, versus intensification of development of places where people live. There have been points raised about don't mixing things. But I think we can say, Mr. Mayor, that to a very balanced degree, the flats plan does mix things where we would like to pilot the opportunity to create that innovation cluster and bring some housing together with some workspace. And the other aspect of the delivery that we've brought to you within these zoning schedules is it provides for us the opportunity to increase housing from the 3,000 odd to the over 4,500. It provides an opportunity for ground level retail and restaurants in the majority of those zones. And the increase in general office through this zoning means that office can achieve 4 FSR in the I3 area without going through a rezoning process. And we're also offering to increase height from 60 feet to 150 feet through conditional provision. These are the questions and the requests that we receive from the public, and we've responded to those, and we have brought zoning schedules to allow for those and to accommodate those requests as far as possible. The other serious challenge that we face in the flats, as with other industrial lands, is the speculation around land and the resultant increase in values. Just last year, we saw the flats values increase by an enormous amount, which could not be explained other than by speculation. And these were the words of BC assessments themselves. They went back in there. Before these zones were even conceptualized, before the False Creek Flats plan was approved by yourselves, those land values went up. I think it was somewhere in the region of 200%. And it was an exceptional increase, which everybody was stunned. This is what drives our local serving industrialists and our artists and our creative industries out of our industrial zones, is these huge increases in land value. If you introduce housing at a large scale, you will also add to that speculation. I think, Corey, you had some? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, we are ready for any questions.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, at Mr. Kelly's request, I'll make a couple of points. These are in response to some of the comments, particularly about the proposed contribution for the rental density. I would make really just 4 quick points. First, what happens when a developer builds a rental housing project, in my opinion, is if you don't impose any rent limit or you don't impose any obligation that the housing be targeted at students or some specific income-related group, developers quite naturally charge market rent. Developers will charge market rent whether you make density available for free, or whether you make it available at half value, or whether you make it available for full value, because like anyone offering a product in the market, they will offer it at market price. I think an important point I would make in Vancouver's residential land market is land values are high because residential selling prices and residential rent rates are high. It's not the other way around. Unit prices aren't expensive because land all of a sudden magically got expensive. It's the market price of housing that determines the market value of land. So we were asked, in the instance of that very small piece that's being suggested for a density bonus of 3.5 FSR for rental housing, whether or not a market rental project could afford to make a contribution for the density, a contribution for land value, and still be viable. Viable to the extent that a developer or an investor would be willing to do or own the project. We applied 2 tests. The first test is we construct a model of how the project works based on anticipated rents, project costs, operating costs, interest rates, cap rates. And we attempt to model whether a developer under those circumstances could afford to pay for land. We came up with an estimate that was $160 per square foot buildable. Now, we can all quibble about individual assumptions in these models. Was a given cost too high or too low? And was an assumption about cap rate too high or too low? But this is the importance of the second test, because we go to the market and look at what people are actually paying for density. Over the last couple of years in Vancouver, developers interested in building high-density concrete rental projects have demonstrated a willingness to pay up to $200 a square foot for development sites. This seems to me reasonable empirical evidence that at that price, at least some developers believe that they can provide viable rental housing projects. There was also a reference to North Van being one other jurisdiction where this is available. I happen to be familiar with the 2 transactions actually that I think were being referenced. In both cases, a developer was willing to pay, I think in one it was $90 a foot buildable and the other $115 to simply buy transferable density to move it onto the site with the express purpose of using that density for rental housing. So, simple answer to the question, if a project is available at full market rent, can it afford to pay a land value and still be viable? In my opinion, the answer is yes. Now, we have to acknowledge market rents are high. Market rents in this town are nowhere near affordable. So if the question is, if market rents support a land value, what about affordable rents? Well, the lower the rent, the lower the supportable land value. And it's a fairly simple piece of math to figure out at what point, if the rent is reduced, would it get to the point where it can't afford 160 or 120 or even 0 for land value. So there is this, if you will, trade-off between the rent rate that one assumes and the land value that would be supported. I think your plan anticipates the possibility that some rental housing could be provided that meets an affordability test. And in that case, the contribution of $120 would not be expected. So there is simply a trade-off here between the rent rate at which one wants to target a project and whether or not it supports the land value. I suppose the last comment I would make is you're probably interested in the question, well, what happens if we don't charge the $120? Where does it go? It will not go into voluntarily less than market rents by private sector developers. It's only got 2 places to go. If a developer already owns a site and gets the extra rental residential density for free, then by definition, that project will perform at what I would call above average compared to a developer across the street who paid $180 or $200 a square foot buildable for land. If the site is not already owned by a developer, I'll tell you what will happen. The very next day, the owner of that property will believe their property is worth at least $120 a square foot buildable more than it was today because they know the density is available for free. And the land market is incredibly quick at capitalizing in the value of extra development entitlements when they're available at a significantly discounted price.
Okay, thank you very much. And with that, that concludes staff comments. So we'll go to council for next steps. Councillor Reimer.
Mayor Robertson, I'm very conscious of all the people who've been waiting to speak on items 8 and 9, and I would then move to refer this item to the October 3rd council meeting for debate and decision. I do have questions for staff, but my understanding is if the referral passes, I can still email those to staff and they could answer them on the 3rd.
That's been our practice with these referrals to future council meetings. Questions can be emailed to staff.
Okay, well, so then I would move referral. I might note for council, it would be my intention to also move referral of item 7 to the end of the agenda in order that we could get, because there's no speakers registered for it, with apologies to the staff who've been waiting, but I am fairly anxious to get on to the speakers.
Okay, so we're referring this item to as unfinished business to the next council meeting, and referring item 7 to the end of the agenda, which will be Thursday.
At this point, it looks like it.
Varying the order of the agenda.
The order of the agenda, yeah.
In other words, we will be on item 8. If this referral motion is approved, okay. We need a seconder for that. Councillor Louie. Councillor DiGenova to the motion. Councillor DiGenova to the motion.
Trying to understand, so 7 would be moved to the end of the agenda?
On Thursday.
On Thursday.
Yeah. We're varying the agenda. That's what she is moving as well.
There's no speakers signed up to speak to 7. Okay, I'm fine with that.
Anyone else to referral of this item? We're ready for the question. We need a electronic vote or raise of hands. So just a raise of hands. All those in favor of referral of this item and varying the agenda. Any opposed? Okay, that carries. So we have referred this item. So council, just be mindful we are not open to public comment now as we go as unfinished business to our next council meeting on the False Creek Flats item. Thanks to staff and to everyone who is here to speak to that item. It will come back to us in 2 weeks at a council meeting. And which staff members should we be emailing questions on item 6 to? Okay, to Corey. Thank you for that. And item number 7 has been moved to Thursday at the end of the agenda on Thursday. It has no speakers signed up for it. That means we're on to item number 8. At last, thanks everyone for your patience. This is the text amendment introducing character home retention incentives and new housing choices in RS zones, single family. Proposed amendments to the zoning and development bylaw. Madam Clerk, can you please read the application and the summary of correspondence received?
This is an application by the General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability to amend the zoning and development bylaw to introduce optional incentives for the retention of character homes and to add new housing choices into all RS single-family district schedules. The incentives include the addition of conditional approval uses in conjunction with retention of a character house, additional floor area, and general relaxation provisions. Added uses include infill dwelling and multiple conversion dwelling, which could be of rental or strata title tenure. The General Manager of Planning, Urban Design and Sustainability recommends approval. Since referral to public hearing, Council has received 10 pieces of correspondence in support of the application and 103 pieces of correspondence in opposition to the application, and this represents all correspondence received up to approximately 4 p.m. today.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And we have Anita Malero here from our Urban Design Division, our Assistant Director, to present the application. As Ms. Malero, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. We'll just wait for the PowerPoint to pop up here. Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to present the component of the Heritage Action Plan, the Character Home Zoning Review. The presentation tonight will include a briefing on the background and context, the proposed zoning amendments and design guidelines, public consultation that we've done on this last component, and our next steps, and a response to council questions. So the Character Home Zoning Review is part of the Heritage Action Plan, which is a series of strategic actions that Council endorsed back in 2013. The Character Home Zoning Review was included in the Heritage Action Plan in response to community concerns about increased demolitions of character homes, rising property values, compatibility and fit of new homes in established neighborhoods. Council asked us to look at amendments to the RS single-family zones to encourage the retention of character homes. The timeline at the bottom of the slide gives you a sense of the engagement and review undertaken since Council endorsed the work in 2013, noting that Council adopted a heritage and character building review interim procedure in 2014. In 2015 and 2016, the work was largely focused on public engagement and consultation, where we heard from thousands of residents and stakeholders and reported back to Council this past May. We are now bringing forward proposed amendments to the RS district schedule, which is contained in Appendix A of your report, to encourage the retention of character zones. The initial focus of our proposed zoning amendments were focused in the RS3, the RS3A, and RS5 areas of the city. These are neighborhoods comprised of Dunbar, Kerrisdale, South Shaughnessy, and a small pocket of Hastings Sunrise. This was also the discretionary RS zone that we have in the city. The study area was expanded to include 4 areas with high concentration of pre-1940 single-family homes. Within this expanded study area, the majority of blocks have 50% or more pre-1940 homes. As directed by Council, in the mid-2016, the Character Home Zoning Review was expanded to include all single-family zones to acknowledge character homes in other neighborhoods and broad citywide interest in the issue of character retention. In the RS zones across the city, there are about 66,500 homes in total, of which approximately 15,000 were built before 1940. Of these, an estimated 80%, that's about 12,000 homes, may qualify as character houses. The proposed zoning amendments that we're putting forward for your consideration today include no change for new construction. To explain that, the current zoning allows an FSR of 0.7 on the site, plus an additional 0.16 FSR for the laneway house. And the uses contained within that property are limited to a single-family house with a secondary suite and a laneway house. The optional incentives for character retention that we are proposing include opportunities to increase the floor area for an addition to a character house from 0.7 FSR to 0.75 down in the lower left, the first box up there, with an option to also continue to pursue a 0.16 laneway house. The character house in the lower left box could also be converted to contain additional units under a use definition referred to as multiple conversion dwelling, again at a density of 0.75. When infill is added to the site, the 2 examples on the right hand there, additional density to 0.85 is allowed to accommodate a second building on the site. The infill may be 0.25, so somewhat larger than a laneway house to allow for a more family-sized dwelling unit. We have shown 2 infill options in these examples, a single-family house with a basement suite and infill at the rear, and a multiple conversion dwelling with infill at the rear. Multiple conversion dwellings and infill options may be strata titled or remain as rental, which will help expand the housing choices in single-family neighborhoods. In addition to these expansion of use choices and tenure within single-family, we are also, some of the regulations, we are also seeking some additional relaxations with respect to yards and setbacks within the zoning. The zoning amendments you can find also in Appendix A. In addition to the zoning amendments, we have also developed a new set of design guidelines. These provide guidance on built form to ensure that additions, infill, and multiple conversion dwellings provide a good fit with the existing house and neighborhood. And those guidelines are also included in your report in Appendix B. As noted earlier, we undertook extensive public engagement and consulted with thousands of residents, homeowners, and stakeholders between February 2015 and January 2017. Our most recent public consultation occurred this past May and June. We published 4 newspaper ads, put up posters in community centers and libraries across the city, sent emails to our listserv, which has over 1,000 recipients, and conducted a social media campaign to invite people to participate in the 3 open houses. We had over 300 people come out to meet with us and tell us their thoughts on the zoning amendments. We also held a practitioners workshop to focus on the technical components of the incentives. As part of our public consultation, we had a questionnaire asking people how they felt about the incentives, and we received 220 completed questionnaires. The response showed strong overall support, with 80% of respondents supporting an incentive approach to encourage character house retention. In terms of the detailed questions about the incentives and guidelines, there was also high levels of support. For example, 83% of respondents supported increased floor area as the incentive. 78% supported multiple conversion dwellings, and 75% supported infill. So that relates to tenure within the buildings. Respondents also supported strata titling of the new housing types. You can find a full summary of the questionnaire in the Appendix C of the report. So our next steps. Through the implementation, if Council approves these zoning amendments, we will monitor the amount of interest in the incentives and report back to Council in 1 year. A staff team has been established to look at the technical challenges and how to improve processing, which may require additional staff resources. We will also report back on the Heritage and Character Building Review, the interim procedure that Council adopted back in 2014. As I mentioned before, this procedure applies to the discretionary zones RS3, RS3A, and RS5, which allow increased floor area through a conditional process. So let's be clear, the outright and conditional streams have the same total floor area in these zones. RS5, as an example, you can do an outright development at 0.7 or a conditional development at 0.7. The difference between the two is that the amount of floor area that you can put above grade versus distributing into the basement. So to give you an example, the difference on a 50-foot site in RS5 means the difference of about 400 square feet above grade, typically distributed over the main and second floor. You have 400 square feet more above grade, but your total FSR on the site is still the same as what you can get under outright. These neighborhoods, as I mentioned before, have the highest concentration of the pre-1940 homes. Staff are recommending continuing the interim procedure for 1 additional year to ensure broad public awareness and consideration of the incentive options. So we received at the July referral some questions from Council, 3 questions. The first question had to do with, had we done any analysis on the potential impacts to rental of allowing strata titling of multiple conversion dwellings and infill? As I mentioned, there are approximately 66,500 single-family houses in RS, of which 12,000 of which may qualify for the retention incentives. It is difficult to estimate how many homeowners would pursue the strata titling because it's optional. Secondary suites and laneway houses will continue to be rental options that are allowed for both new house construction and character retention projects throughout the RS zones. The second question was, are there concerns that fewer homeowners will protect heritage homes through an HRA and instead choose character home incentives? The proposed amendments will make processing and approval of character retention applications faster, as they would not require the legal agreements and public hearings associated with an HRA process. We understand that this means that not as many houses will be legally protected or designated, but they will be incentivized through retained through the retention program. However, our experience in other zones where we have similar zoning constructs, Mount Pleasant, Kitsilano, Strathcona, where the conditional zoning is structured for retention that allows for an increase in FSR compared to FSR available for a new house, demonstrates that this is an effective way to retain character houses. As I mentioned, we will monitor and make adjustments, changes, if required, as part of a report back in a year. In addition, I would note that through the Heritage Action Plan, we are reviewing heritage incentives, including consideration of what heritage sites might be eligible for additional incentives in exchange for heritage protection. This is different. Heritage buildings are different than character buildings. They're of a different category. The third question is, why is reduced floor area for new construction not recommended? As we reported to Council in May, there are several key reasons why staff are not recommending reducing the outright floor areas for new construction in RS zones. Firstly, there was no public consensus regarding the amount of reduced floor area. While the questionnaire at the time showed that almost 60% of respondents supported decreasing floor area to better manage scale and fit of new homes, less than half agreed with the specific amounts of what that lower density might be. Homeowners were particularly concerned about the potential decreases in property value. Second, there were policy changes from all levels of government intended to help stabilize the housing market, such as the foreign purchasers tax, mortgage rule changes, and an empty homes tax. As the full impact of these policy changes are not yet known, zoning changes that limit new construction could further add to uncertainty and volatility to the single-family market. And finally, staff recognized that there's a need for a broader public discussion on the role of single-family and low-density neighborhoods, which will be part of the Vancouver housing strategy. So in conclusion, I would like to note that the Character Home Review, the Grandview Woodlands Mount Pleasant RT zone, which you will now hear on Thursday night, and the Vancouver Housing Emerging Strategy, all have many alignments in terms of the two zonings that Council is considering this week, the RS and the RT on Thursday. There's many attributes of what we're proposing in the Character House and the RS zones that are very similar to what we're proposing in the RT, both in terms of density, but also in unit distribution and tenure on the site. And these are also consistent with the emerging directions of the Housing Vancouver, with creating more housing choices, opportunities for home ownership on a site, as well as still preserving and having flexibility for rental on that site as well. So thank you. And I have a number of staff here, both from planning, heritage, and building staff, to answer any questions that Council may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm going to suggest, given the limited time left, that we put those questions off and go right to hearing from speakers who've been waiting patiently for us. Is Council okay with that? We can have questions when we pick this up again on Thursday. So we'll go with that to our speakers list, and speaker number 1 is Bryn Davidson. Speaker number 2 is Marion Jameson. Welcome.
Hi. I'm Bryn Davison. I'm co-owner of Lane Fab Design Build. Our company designs and builds custom homes for homeowners. We're not a developer. We're not flipping properties. We're actually just building homes for existing homeowners. And so to that extent, the comments here tonight are less about our interest as a company and more about sort of reflecting the interests of the clients that we're talking to. I would like to speak broadly in favor of these incentives, and then also offer a few comments potentially on the process of how we deliver these types of homes. I think it's a great thing that we're looking at how to save some of these nice examples of older homes. I think it's a good thing that we're doing this citywide and that we've taken down zoning off the table. This carrots approach with incentives I think is really good, and it's really close to the point I think where it's potentially tipping the balance for what some people are deciding in terms of whether or not to keep their existing home. As it is, we meet with a lot of clients and they are often asking us, should we tear down or rebuild? And now, since these new incentives have started to be talked about, we've had a number of people come and approach us about how they might take advantage of that. So we have a number of current clients who are sitting waiting to find out if these go through, and we've been talking to numbers, maybe more than 10 in the last month or so, of people who are also interested in finding out if they can take advantage of these. Surprisingly, there's been less interest in the stratification than in the ability to do a larger laneway house, something that might be family sized, or the ability to make their existing character home large enough that it could actually function for all the sort of extended family uses that they're wanting to do. What we're finding is that a lot of these character homes, even if they're cute, they're often really pretty undersized for the multifamily functions that people are trying to do, make use of today. A lot of these older homes have these large swaths of area that I'd call in the bad Goldilocks zone. It's higher than 4 feet, so it counts as floor area, but it's less than, say, 6'10", so it's not proper living area. So it's this kind of in-between sort of useless area where it counts as floor area and they're being penalized in a way because of that, but it's not proper, not insulated, it's not a great living space. And so because so much of that is encountered in floor area, we often end up needing to lift a house and gut it and totally redo it, which at that point, it's pretty easy, slippery slope right to tearing it down and rebuilding it entirely. So I think this incentive package that's coming together is actually, I think, potentially quite interesting for a lot of our clients. In terms of whether they're going to make that decision, though, I think it starts to get to the second part of what I want to talk about, which was the process. Because it's my understanding that these incentives would be regulated in a way similar to what's been done in the other RT zones. Are we going to need a development permit for these projects? Okay. So my concern is that on the one hand, we have a process like we'd have for laneway houses, which is quite straightforward, doesn't require neighbor notification, doesn't require a development permit. You negotiate the design with a city planner, and then you go ahead and get the building permit. On the other hand, you have to insert this extra development permit process, which is quite convoluted and quite time-consuming. And right off the bat, we're going to charge at least an extra $10,000 on the design stage just to deal with the bureaucracy of that development permit stage. And so I was really hoping that in the process of developing these incentives, we would take the success of the laneway house model as a way to deliver a lot of these things and really make that tipping point to the point where people would keep the character home. I'm a little sad that we've gone the route of asking for all of this additional process, additional neighbor notification, all this other stuff. So anyway, we'll leave it at that. But I think there is a lot of interest, and I think it's important that these do go forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for being here to speak and giving your input. Speaker number 2 is Marion Jameson, Director of Upper Kitts Residents Association, followed by Dr. Brutton.
Hi, Marion Jameson, Upper Kitsilano Residents Association. We are strongly opposed to the changes that are being proposed, and I'll be addressing my remarks to both the report that is the basis for the proposed changes and the amendments themselves. We'll be providing a set of recommendations as to what we see as an alternative, a better approach to planning in the RS neighborhoods, and a rationale for each of our recommendations. So the first of our recommendations, and I heard the staff comment on the reduced outright FSR for new construction of new homes, and the fact that there was no consensus on this, on the size of the FSR, the proposed FSR. We have to say how disappointed we were to have this option removed under the auspices of these changes to the RS districts. During the Character House zoning review, a lot of our residents put a lot of time and energy into that review. We thought it was very well done, and we're very disappointed to have it subsumed under this new direction. The report states clearly that the only incentive that will really work is the reduced FSR for new builds. However, without any clear rationale, that option is not included. And instead, there are dark hints about future reviews that might include duplexing and triplexing in the RS zones. So we were very disappointed with that. We thought that the Character House zoning review was excellent, and would have liked to have seen that reduced FSR reinstated and looked at carefully, because that is the only incentive that's going to work to save character houses. The second recommendation we have is to limit the size of retention to 0.7 FSR. 0.85 will pretty much use up the entire lot, and whether or not that'll have impacts on biodiversity in the neighborhoods, I don't think is being taken into consideration. I think the Character House definition should include pre-1950s homes, that the 1940s cutoff is arbitrary, and that if council were to go ahead with these changes, that there should be rate of change provisions so that there isn't an intense concentration of new construction going on in the RS neighborhoods. Already, the residential neighborhoods in Vancouver are pretty much the industrial heartlands of BC, and all levels of government seem quite happy for that to continue. A neighborhood like Upper Kitsilano was not well suited to multiple conversion projects and infill houses. The lots tend to be smaller, the houses tend to be more modest. This kind of thing works with housing, with neighborhoods where the houses are larger and can be easily converted into multiple units. But in smaller homes, that's not going to work without completely rebuilding the house and destroying the character. In addition, of course, the building code and zoning regulations, the multiple conversion projects are going to be a lot more expensive than the existing suites. Overall, we're not in favor of the strata title option that's being presented here. We see our neighborhoods as providing much needed rental accommodation in a city with a 0% vacancy rate. There are basement suites and laneway houses for rent, which addresses both ends of the rental affordability spectrum. And permitting multiple conversion developments and infills and putting them on strata for sale will remove a whole swath of affordable rentals in our city. I don't think that's conscionable. The overall criticism we have is that this is a top-down approach, that instead of working with the neighborhoods to find out what would work best for them, this kind of heavy-handed citywide policy approach is not good planning. I think that there should be a much more neighborhood-based approach to find where changes like these could take place and how. Okay, but the final recommendation that I think is most important is that there has to be some performance measures. Too often the city puts in place citywide policies without checking at all to make sure that they're working. And even if the data comes in that they're not working, there is no backup plan for what else will be done. So we are recommending that there be performance measures that actually measure whether or not these changes would bring about increased affordability and protect the character homes, and that these should be made public, and that there should be a backup plan that involving the neighborhoods in a community-based residents association set up in each neighborhood to work with city planners on these kinds of zoning changes instead of this top-down autocratic approach. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Councillor Carr, questions?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much for coming and obviously putting the time into very specific recommendations. My first question is around the very first point you made, which is that you are recommending that there would be a reduction in the outright FSR for new build or new construction. Our staff, if you remember when they were giving the presentation, said that the problem about why they didn't include that is because there was no consensus or no agreement around how much that reduction should be. In your experience working with your association members and the residents in your area, do you think that there could be, that your community could land on an appropriate reduction in FSR for new builds that would receive the vast majority of support?
I think that most people that I have talked to would have supported the 0.5 FSR that was proposed. And I'm sure that if we looked back at what was done in the RT zone in West Kitsilano, where the FSR is 0.4, the outright FSR, that every last person in the neighborhood wasn't, you know, the planning staff didn't ensure that every last person was in favor of this. An FSR that was reasonable, that would obviously protect the character of the neighborhood, was established. And I have to suspect that this is an excuse for not implementing a reduced outright FSR. It'll take political will, it will take political guts for this council to say, no, we're putting the brakes on gentrification in the RS neighborhoods. We're putting the brakes on increases in housing prices and speculation by reducing the outright FSR.
Okay. Thank you. A second question, it was on your second point about limiting the size even for retention below 0.85 because of the impact on biodiversity. What do you mean by the impact on biodiversity?
I am an urban gardener. I live in a small bungalow and I can grow probably about 25% of what my partner and I eat on our front and backyard because the house is small and there's enough sunshine that and enough space, enough soil that I can grow all kinds of stuff. Right now I've got lettuce and carrots and beets and beans and, you know, you name it. Not to mention, of course, the number of trees and, you know, pollinating plants and bird habitat and everything else that is in the RS neighborhoods. And if we continue to remove all the vegetation and replace it with housing, we'll have an overall loss in biodiversity in this city. And I don't think that's being measured or even considered. The focus is always on housing. There was a really interesting article in the Courier lately about how sooner or later we've got to start thinking about food security as well as housing, and how I believe we supply about 12% of our food needs in this city. And meanwhile, we continue to pave over and shoehorn more and more people into the city with no consideration for how we're going to feed them and other biodiversity issues.
Thank you. Regarding the multiple conversion dwellings. You noted that this could have a negative impact in terms of expense and loss of rental. Are you saying remove it entirely as an option and just retain suites,
Well,
do
it's
secondary
back
suites,
to
or have it as an
the
option?
planning approach. A top-down policy approach like this is a one-size-fits-all approach that may not work for our neighborhood. There may be pockets of our neighborhood, and in fact there are, where there are larger homes that probably would lend themselves to multiple conversion projects. But I believe that most of the homes, which were built in the late 30s, early 40s, are smaller, and because of the very onerous Vancouver building bylaw, would require completely rebuilding, taking down to one wall in order to provide units for sale with the requirements, the more rigorous building code requirements for individual units like that. And I believe that the instead of multiple conversion projects, developments, in our neighborhood, a secondary suite would be a much better option. It would increase rental stock. They're smaller under the secondary suite program, easier to put in place, and would not alter the character of the older homes.
Okay, that is your time, and no further questions, Ms. Jamieson. Thank you for being